Right.
So 75 hours later.
Very new. So it's like new.
Yeah.
The thing is, I use both my old and my new laptop.
Yeah. As the guy pointed out, I mean, it's
Tomorrow's
on
mailing.
its last legs. And
Oh,
so you want
it's
to
got the
lock
same
it into
kind of
about
report.
75
Okay.
bucks to get
So we can just put that aside.
anyway,
Where we need it. We don't need it
And I
unless you
got
want to
a
refer to the FinCom report.
hard drive backup. Because I know full well that I have that computer's not gonna.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now you can write in your book if you want to directly. The mailing's going on.
I might-
It went out today.
Missed
So how
opportunity
cool
for
is that? I
recycling.
just sent it to John. I'm so happy.
We're not
Sure.
live, so actually we have one more time.
I do?
I don't count.
Yeah, no, we're not live, so actually we have a little more time than
Well,
usual.
just give me a minute.
Oh,
People turn on their TV. Where are they?
Right.
6:03.
yeah, they do.
Oh, right.
That's
Wow.
pressure.
They're watching the planning board right now.
That's right.
Where the actual
All
is.
right, let's see what I got.
Good, then
All
I
right.
need another minute too.
That's why we're here.
That's
Right.
fine. Now,
So Jim and Aaron,
Alan's the chief.
just because I'm boss and Diana around down here, I wouldn't want you to feel left out. In your
We
packet,
can't hear you.
in your packet down there,
You still
the one
can't,
that's
we're
on
not
the
hearing you.
pile. Now you're
Yeah.
just ignoring me. Like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So there's stuff in there for Articles 13 and 17.
Yeah.
And the things on our desk, it's a poster packet, you mean?
Yeah.
got it.
And we talked about them tonight.
Stuff that we would not have had a chance to read before tonight, but is now in front of us.
These are at the
So-
bottom of the package here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the stuff in the brown,
Oh,
She
yeah.
means your town meeting
your
packet.
brand new town meeting packet,
Oh, in the-
mailing number 3.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I think it's this thing.
So I
there.
will label this town
Which
meeting
you just saw
packet.
when you got
Did you
here.
say Article 13?
Article 13 and
13
17.
Okay.
and 17.
Sorry.
Lucky 13.
In addition
lucky.
to some other stuff that we're not doing tonight.
I thought you
but
said
13
30.
and 17.
And we're
In
talking
case
about both of
somebody
them tonight.
like who's presenting pulls
Thank
out
you.
a piece of paper, it's, you do this piece of paper.
Okay, so where does this go? Finance committee.
So it's going up to 66,000.
Wasn't it?
Used to be 65.
Oh, okay, 66.
Oh, I thought 65.
28.
Oh, that looks good, that would go for them.
Here, second.
24 and 25.
Snow covered trees.
And 29.
Yes. It's like taking an October out there.
Oh, right, for your
Is that all right? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I can move if you like.
It's been one of those days. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
It's very helpful. Okay. So
You're not
I'll
having
just-
any investors, that's right.
Oh, I'm so good when they do this.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Very
it's
important.
user-friendly looking, you know, so people might
So,
actually.
I know. I was thinking about doing that for the other, what's our Article 24?
Okay.
Same thing, because you can put it
Okay,
right
so
out there.
seriously?
All right.
Serious,
Select
we're
board
ready,
ready?
you're ready.
We are ready.
All right, so just remember that even though we're in this weird space, let's not lose the general formality of how it works. All right, ACTV, are you ready for us? All right, then welcome to the April 18th Select Board meeting. We are underway at 6:34 p.m. We are in a strange location tonight because we are at the community room of the police department. That is because we are meeting on a Wednesday because of the Monday holiday, and typically during this week we always meet on this Wednesday here because we can't take this week off because we have so many zoning articles, or rather warrant articles to get through. So, per usual, we start with public comment. Is anyone here for public comment this evening? Okay, so we will get through some untimed items before we get to our first timed item at 6:45. Last meeting, you'll recall, we went until like 11 o'clock, so we had a bunch of things we did not get to last time, so those have been postponed to this agenda, and one of those things is the letter of agreement for Pioneer Valley Planning Commission for district local technical assistance. I'm not sure if folks had a chance to look at this. This is something that the planning department and the planning board has been talking with Pioneer Valley Planning Commission about for some time, getting technical assistance specifically on transfer of development rights. They want to create a bylaw or do some sort of analysis and regulation regarding to transfer of development rights. And this looked like a good opportunity to work with Pioneer Valley Planning Commission on. And if you've read the letter, it has the details about basically it requires that the town commit a certain amount of people hours to this project. The planning board is urging us to please sign this because we make the agreement with them official. It has their full backing, and that is the explanation of that. If for folks who are following along at home, this information is part of our web packet. So does anybody have any questions about this? Okay. Ms. Stein, oh, I'm sorry.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. During the comprehensive planning committee's work, my colleagues may remember the question of how to move around development rights came up in several different places. And when I saw this letter, well, we're actually going to be acting on trying to figure out how to do that. It came up in housing, it came up in open space, and economic development, the three chapters that the idea, the concept was being explored. So, here we go.
Good, yeah, so it's a good opportunity to move it forward. Ms. Stein, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I move that the select board acknowledge receipt from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in support of a scope of work for Amherst local technical assistance and affirm a commitment to work to implement the work performed as appropriate and in the best interest of the town of Amherst, including provision of an in-kind match equivalent to 5% of the total budget, which may include community staff or volunteer employee time.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that is unanimous. Thank you. Next up for untimed items, we have parking and street closure requests. And the first one is for the Extravaganza Festival, which is Saturday the 28th. You might recall that we had voted on this one already and approved the parking request, but the office just got a little bit confused with the various parking request commitments that we have going on at that time, and because that was going to interfere with the farmers market, we're changing the parking that we had granted to them, and they have been notified of that, and they're fine with it. We just need to make it official. So, Ms. Stein, would you like to make that motion?
I move to amend, that the select board amend the parking reservation approval voted Monday, March 26, 2012 for the UMass Amherst Cannabis Reform Coalition's Extravaganza Festival to be held on Saturday, April 28, 2012 from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. from the 18-metered parking spaces on the south side of the Spring Street parking lot and 2 metered spaces on the west side of Boltwood Avenue, specifically the 4th and 5th metered space moving south from Spring Street. 2, the reservation of the first 3 metered parking spaces on the east side of South Pleasant Street going south from the intersection of Spring Street, and 6 metered parking spaces originating at the 5th meter on the west side of Boltwood Avenue, moving south towards College Street on Saturday, April 28, 2012, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. for the UMass Amherst Cannabis Reform Coalition's Extravaganza Festival.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. So next up is the community fair. This is an annual request, and we have 2 different motions that are attached to this, and these are highlighted in yellow on your revised motion sheets. And so there's the fair parking itself, and also for the Lions Club iMobile to be part of that fair parking.
Okay, and so are we gonna start with the first, which is not yellow?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, there are three motions altogether.
Right.
2 of them are highlighted.
All right, these are all for the community fair and related. I move that the select board approve the closure of that section of Spring Street within the Spring Street parking lot from 2 p.m. Friday, May 18th, 2012 to 12 a.m. Saturday, May 19th, 2012, and again on Saturday, May 19th, 2012 from 1:30 p.m. following the closure of the farmers market to 12 a.m. Sunday, May 20th, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous.
I move that the select board approve the reservation of 21-meter parking spaces on the westerly side of Boltwood Avenue, originating at College Street, moving north towards Spring Street, 8 a.m. Tuesday, May 15, 2012, through 12:01 a.m. Saturday, May 19, 2012. 18-meter parking spaces on the westerly side of Boltwood Avenue, originating at College Street, moving north towards Spring Street from 8 a.m. Saturday, May 19, 2012, to 12 a.m. Sunday, May 20th, 2012. And the 3 metered parking spaces on the easterly side of South Pleasant Street, south of the taxi stand, from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. Thursday, May 17th, 2012, Friday, May 18th, 2012, and Saturday, May 19th, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, Ms. Berg?
I just wonder if that last, it's always confusing when you talk about AMs and PMs. I just wonder if we should change that last 12 AM to midnight. But I'm just, as long as the parking people know what we mean, so they don't, surely they will know what we mean, right? They've done the
Yes.
softening now.
And
The map says
it's right on the map.
Yeah, I agree. It
It's
would
clearer
flow better
on the
that
map.
way.
Of course, right there, if it's.
Right.
All right, further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous.
This is for the Lions Club, Evamobile. I move that the select board approve the reservation, it's I-mobile? It's lost. It's
Well, it's not
lost
about
in
vision
the
here.
underline. Yes, you see, I need the I corrections, thank you. I move that the select board approve the reservation of the 3-meter parking spaces on the westerly side of Boltwood Avenue, originating at Spring Street, moving south toward College Street, on Saturday, May 19, 2012, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Second.
And that's for the Lions Club, I-mobile.
I-mobile, right. Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Okay, where are we? 6:42, so we still have another couple minutes. Do we have any taxi licenses? No, we have special liquor licenses.
I move that the select board approve an all alcoholic special license for Danielle LaFerriere and Greg Wardlaw on behalf of Amherst College Catering to operate a cash bar at an end of school year event to be held in the King and Wayland dorms at Amherst College from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. midnight, Thursday, April 26, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous.
I move that the select board approve a wine and malt special license for Brenda Ryan Newton on behalf of UMass Amherst for a reception in the Conti Building, University of Massachusetts Amherst, from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., Tuesday, May 8th, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that is unanimous. All right. Through the licenses, 6:44. Public hearing, so we really can't start early. Is there anything else we can do for 45 seconds?
How about, well, that involves minutes, but I don't know.
Has anybody had do we think we can approve the minutes quickly? Did folks look at the minutes?
That's the wrong question, just the first question.
Can we approve the minutes quickly?
Yes.
I have read the minutes, I have only minor corrections.
Okay. Right.
I have lost the minutes, however. No, they're here somewhere.
They're here from last week.
I know, but I did actually click on. Yes, here they are. Okay, how about I move the whole slew and then just pass my minor corrections to John? Would that work?
Second.
I'd say so.
I move that the select board approve the select board meeting minutes of March 5th, 2012, March 26th, 2012, and March 30th as amended.
Second.
Further discussion. I would just note, I don't know how minor yours are, but on the one for March 30th, I would just like to include a tiny reference to having read the document as provided by Ms. Perot before we sign the warrant. So it says reviewed the warrant, and I think we should also say and read that document. The document that's referenced at the bottom.
Like I said, I had.
Yes, that's a good point.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I apologize for not getting those in writing, but
And okay, mine are just, I asked that on the March 26th meeting, that the report that they handed us from the shelter said that Ms. Quinn is the outgoing executive director, and that Mr. Noonan is the new executive director of Great Stores, because I thought that was important, and the rest is minor.
that's good.
Yeah.
I'm good with those. Any
Yep.
other?
You can have my copy, John.
All right, so then, any additional further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous, minutes approved. Okay, now we're ready for public hearing. All right, this public hearing is called to order at 6:46, and this is in fact two public hearings, both called to order at the same time, which I'm told I was able to do, open and close them together. These are this is classic kind of technicality public hearing on the liquor license that we do periodically. And this is for some change of stockholders at Ginger Garden. So we have Christy Bodine here, the attorney for Ginger Garden. Hello, welcome.
Is it okay if I remain seated?
Yes,
Okay.
We're in a funny place this time. So you just have to talk a little bit loud
Sure.
so that the mics can pick you up. So what
So
are we doing?
these are two related really sets of transactions. In November of 2011, the corporation voted to add capital, to issue additional stock to the existing stockholders. And that's what the November 11 packet is about. They added another, I believe it was $100,000 in stock to their capitalization. And the packet attached includes all of the financial records for the people who purchased the stock, Corey forms, and all the other documents that are required by the ABCC to do this transaction. And obviously, they can't actually do it till it's approved, but they have voted to do this. I don't know how much detail or how many questions you might have about this.
Select Board have any questions about this stock transfer? So folks who are following along at home know, because the liquor licenses are so specific as to exactly what the town has approved, all kinds of changes, no matter how small, need to come before us. So whether it's a change in stockholder because the license as approved lists the stockholders, whether it's a change in the physical space in any way, that all needs to come before us for approval, and all needs to go through the same notification and public hearing process. So that's what this is all about. All right, no questions from the select board, any comment from the public? No. So then, I need a motion to close both public hearings at 6:48.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry.
the second
Yeah.
part of this I haven't.
Oh, I apologize, go ahead.
That's part one. Part two is, was voted in January of 2012. It gets confusing. Some of the original stockholders and officers are leaving the company. New officers are being elected and coming into the company. The new officers are purchasing stock. The people who are leaving are selling their stock back to the corporation, so the ownership pool of the stock is changing, and the numbers of shares owned by each person are changing, and that's what this second application is for. They essentially, they accepted the resignation of 2 directors. They increased the number of directors from 2 to 3. They appointed the 3 new directors. They accepted the resignations of the president, secretary, and treasurer, and appointed new president, secretary, and treasurer. And they redeemed and bought back the shares of stock from the departing officers, and then issued the redeemed shares out to new shareholders. It took a long time to put this together because of all of the personal information and banking information and subsidiary information that we needed to make it all happen. Again, what's in this package is all the documents that are required by ABCC, I hope, to have this happen. And that's what we're seeking your approval on.
Any questions from select board on that part of it? And so again, this is all in the same line of technicality as far as we're concerned, but the information does still go to our chief of police, who does the kinds of checking that he needs to do on this kind of information, and it is coming to us recommended for approval, so there were no concerns on that end. All right, so now we're done with all the technicalities. No, this group.
I wonder if, and perhaps while the hearing is still open, you know, we have these two packages. I actually did read part of them, and the rest is just forms, which luckily we don't have to fill out. One of them's dated the 14th and one's dated the 15th, and that's not actually reflected in our motion, and I wonder if we can just add that to our motion in case we were looking for it later. I know that the vote that was taken.
Actually.
But these were-
Well, actually, you're right, because I'm looking at the cover sheet. One's dated the 13th and one's dated the 15th.
And that was done deliberately, so
So
that you
that
have
you could
an
separate
easier
them.
reference as to which transactions went
And I would like to
And
make
they
sure our
need to be
motions reflect that.
processed in that order, or they won't make any sense. In other words, if the November transactions don't get processed all the way through, then the January transactions aren't gonna make any sense at all.
Right, okay.
And my reason for referencing that beyond just being obsessive about dates is that summary memo was really helpful in terms of understanding what all the paperwork was. So I'd like to make it clear that that's there.
Okay, so when we make the motion, you can just say whatever you
Yeah.
want to. Okay, so first we need a motion to close the public hearing.
I would like to move to close the public hearing then.
Is there further discussion on closing the public hearings? And all in favor, say aye.
Perfect.
Aye.
Aye, public hearing is closed at 6:52. All right, deliberation by select board. Deliberation. We don't have any.
No,
Ms. Stein, would you like to make the motion or let Ms. Brewer make the?
No,
She's already got it.
She's with me.
Okay.
We agree. I move that the select board approve the application of Amherst Gourmet Incorporated, doing business as Ginger Garden, 351 Northampton Road, Amherst, MA, ABCC license number 24000059, as voted in November 2011, for issuance of 10,000 additional shares of stock current of stockholders at $10 per share to increase net capital by 100,000 as dated, as in the document dated March 13th, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Next.
I move that the select board approve the application of Amherst Gourmet Incorporated, doing business as Ginger Garden, 351 Northampton Road, Amherst, MA, ABCC license number 24000059, as voted in January of 2012, to change directors and officers and to transfer stock from departing shareholders to existing and new shareholders with no change in net capital of the corporation, as in the document dated March 15th, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion, Mr. Hayden.
I just want to say that, once again, I say this often, I appreciate the package that we got that had all of these excruciating details on everything, and especially the cover memos that we got that
Yes.
made it obvious what was going on, so we could actually follow the thread.
Yes, thank you very much. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for the information. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for your votes.
How are things going at Ginger Garden?
Very well,
Good.
very well. Paul, in fact, Paul Chang, who's the new president of the corporation, said, "They don't want me there tonight, do they? Because I'm really busy and I can't make it."
Excellent.
That's good.
Okay.
That's good. We're glad to hear it.
Thank you. Thank you. 6:55, perfect timing. We now have a common victualler's license for Froyo World. Is anyone here for that? Please come forward. So we have in our packets the information for an application for Froyo World, which, as I understand it, is a new frozen yogurt place that's going in where That's a Wrap used to be.
Yes,
And you are?
I'm Eric Wood. I'm one of the owners for your world.
Could you repeat your name again?
Eric Lee.
Eric Lee, thank you.
The last name is spelled L-I.
Thank you, great. And so we like to have folks come in when we get a new common victualer's license for a new business, just to give the business a chance to do a little commercial so that the folks who are watching the meeting know about it. So congratulations on your store. When do you plan to open?
Thank you. We'll be opening at the beginning of May. We'll be in the first week. We haven't set an official date yet, but it'll be in the first week of May.
Wonderful.
It's going to be self-serve frozen yogurt. So you just walk up with a cup, and you could, and we'll have 10 flavors to choose from, and you just choose however much you want from whichever machine, and you put on the toppings that you want, whichever amount that you want, and then it just gets weighed at the end, and so you get the quantity of what you like. And we have 40 different flavors that we rotate through. Our original tart is actually won some awards in San Francisco and in Rhode Island as well. And yeah, we're looking forward to being here and serving the community and the students over here in Amherst.
Wonderful. I was just in Florida recently and saw a self-serve yogurt place when I was visiting my in-laws, and I was thinking, I'd like to try that.
Now?
It came to you.
That's great. It's wonderful. So you said you're opening in the beginning of May?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, any questions for Mr. Lee from Select Board? That's great.
Since we're just talking in general, it gives you a little chance to tell us a little bit about your business as well, as you just did, so I appreciate that. The only other frozen yogurt that I'm aware of that we have in town associated with GoBerry is one of their issues is being locally sourced. They have local milk, they have local yogurt product. Is there anything like that associated with Froyo World? Is Froyo World like a worldwide thing, or is it like a one-person thing?
We're a franchisee.
Okay.
It's based in Connecticut. They started out 2 years ago. The first one was actually in New Haven by Yale, and then they opened up another one in Providence by Brown. Then they opened a third one in Puerto Rico because somebody came up and liked the idea, so they kept the franchise and brought it back to Puerto Rico, so now it's international.
Great.
We'll have 15 by the end of this summer. It's increasing rapidly. A lot of people like the flavors. I tried a number of different froyo shops before I decided to franchise with them. I like the fact that they're local. Local in terms of a lot of places, they start in the West Coast, and the owners are in the West Coast, and they hardly see what their franchisees are doing. But with Froyo World, they've come out a number of times just to visit the location. They were here when the construction began. So I went with Froyo World. And when I said they won the award in West Coast, it's actually they spun off from a different company in the West Coast. And then they brought the formula over and started in the East Coast here. So in terms of local sourcing, we're not going to specifically state everything will be bought at a local farmers market. We'll try, but it depends on what's in season and what the is just what's available.
Great.
The yogurt that we use is actually fresh yogurt. It's actually actual yogurt instead of using powder. A lot of places use powder to mix to create their frozen yogurts. Ours are actually frozen, really frozen yogurt that comes to us, and we have to thaw it and we put it into the machines. So there's still the probiotics and everything that comes with eating.
Great. Thank you. All right, any other questions for Select Board? Ms. Stein, would you like to?
I move that the Select Board approve the application for a common victualler license for Froyo World, 23 North Pleasant Street, Amherst, MA. Hours of operation 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., Monday through Sunday. Manager Eric Lee.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, unanimous.
Good luck.
Congratulations, look forward to your opening. Thank you for coming in. All right, next up, we have our annual Arbor Day proclamation, and we have Mr. Snow here to talk to us about this. Welcome. When is Arbor Day?
Arbor Day for the town of Amherst is going to be this Saturday, 21st, as part of the Amherst Sustainability Festival. Nationally, it's pretty much the last Friday of April. We try to merge it with all the environmental kind of things going on in town for the Sustainability Festival. This will also be the town's 25th year of the Tree City USA community. So, 25th time the select board has had an Arbor Day proclamation.
Wonderful. And will we get extra points for being a tree city once we get into our capital requests that are coming up later? One of our capital items is money to plant, is it 2,000 trees over the next some number of years?
Because the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, their grant program does look at your standing as a Tree City USA community as part of their criteria when they look at grants for tree plantings. Shows that the community is committed to trees.
Okay, let's see, Ms. Stein, would you like to read the proclamation?
Sure.
You can say no.
No, I love reading, even when I say, even when I mean, proclamation. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. This holiday, called Arbor Day, was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. Trees in our town increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal, and Amherst has been recognized as a Tree City USA by the National Arbor Day Foundation and desires to continue its tree planting ways. Now therefore, we, the Select Board of the Town of Amherst, do hereby proclaim April 21st, 2012 as Arbor Day in the Town of Amherst, and we urge all citizens to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands and to support our town's urban forestry program.
Second.
Further discussion? Ms. Brewer?
I am certainly going to vote in favor of this, as I always do, but knowing that we're going to come back to this associated with joint capital planning, I still wanted to ask Mr. Snow while he was here if he could give us, and therefore the viewing audience that isn't live tonight for a change, but will, I'm sure, watch us with great attention at another time, 2 questions, or actually one's a comment, and that is that there's a tree planting workshop associated with the Sustainability Festival, and I just wanted to point out how great of an idea I thought that was, because sometimes people think, well, I'll just plant the tree, but there actually is a little bit of knowledge that's helpful to have to make the tree successful, and so I think that was a really,
That's gonna be
really
at,
important part of the Sustainability Festival.
Noon, 12 o'clock on Sweets Park.
That's great. And the other thing is associated with all the trees we lost in the fall, so with the storm. Do you have some estimate that you provided to people? I'm sure the town manager has one too, associated with DPW, but just to give people a sense of the fact that Arbor Day is always important to us in Amherst, as you said, 25 years, but having lost so many trees that it's of particular focus for us now.
You're asking how many trees we lost?
Or some percentage of something.
Well, I guess it's very difficult to say how many trees we lost. Many of the trees that we are cleaning up and removed came from private property, fell into the right of way. Some of our trees
Sure.
fell into private property.
Yeah.
There's a whole effort by everybody in town to clean it up. And, so I really don't have a hard number of how many trees we've lost. It's pretty safe to say that just about every tree was damaged in some way.
Wow.
And a lot of that we won't see till the trees come out of leaf. There's cracks in the branches. For years to come, we'll be seeing more decay in the branches as decay fungi and things enter into these wounds. So it's a big impact on the trees.
So it's not just a this year problem,
Not just
but it's a,
it's going to be ongoing.
thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. It's unanimous. And just, I noted that is the wrong date on it, we just need to fix. So I have the signing copy, we'll deal with that later. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
coming
much.
in. Look forward to seeing you
Thank
at
you,
the
Al.
Thank you.
Sustainability Festival. All right, next up, we have FY13 budget discussion. We had, back in January, when the town manager made his recommended budget proposal to us, one of the elements of that was a prioritized unfunded list for additions and restorations. And at that time, we put off discussion of that list because we didn't have enough information about how things were going to go. At this point, we have both a specific recommendation related to that list and new information about the state budget. So I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Musanti to sort of frame it more than that, go into more detail.
Sure, and actually, let me talk about the what was the unfunded list back from my January budget proposal. I had a number of items on there. While we still believe we're in a much more stable year coming up than we have been in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's a good thing. It's still a very tight budget. I had come up with a prioritized list of potential items to consider if additional funding became available through the state budget process. And I'm now able to recommend to you that in the municipal budget, we move forward with just one item off of that list, the first item on the list, and that is $40,000 to be added to the LSSC budget to strengthen and consolidate an after-school program in collaboration with the Amherst School Department, and we have a summary memo. I know the Finance Committee at their meeting last Thursday night unanimously supported that recommendation from Superintendent Garrick and I. This recommendation comes on the heels of a independent study jointly funded by the town and the schools. We engaged some experts from Wellesley College who have special expertise in after-school programming for young people. They came up with a series of recommendations that included the fact that there were a number of strengths to our existing programs, but we had 5 different programs at our 3 elementary schools total. That having a single stronger program at each school with greater collaboration with our school staff would strengthen the program. And we've been working with Superintendent Garrick and all of the providers to work up a model. LSSC will play a role in the oversight and administration of those programs, but there'd basically be a single site director at each of the 3 elementary schools. We would continue to serve roughly 200 students. There'd be a equitable and uniform fee structure, because the lion's share of the cost of providing this program would continue to be borne by participants in the program. The town money, the $40,000, would be used to offer subsidies for participation for low and moderate income eligible families. The school elementary budget, there's, I believe, $30,000 allocated in the elementary budget. the existing appropriation, upcoming appropriation, for an after-school programming coordinator position. That position would work with the site directors. Principals of the 3 elementary schools would be actively involved as well in program oversight and coordination. And there's also some grant money on the school side, in particular Title I grants, federal grants. The superintendent is working with staff to develop transportation rides home, some sort of late afternoon bus to encourage more young people to participate and remove a barrier that may exist for some for their participation. So the recommendation would be to amend my original town manager recommendation, add the $40,000 for leisure services. That'll be reflected in the motion that's before you tonight. The other functional thing required to get this consolidated program in place for the fall is to create a separate revolving fund under Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2. This would be a separate fund just for after-school programming. It wouldn't be lumped in with the other LSSC programs that are accounted for in the LSSC revolving fund. And we need to create a fund, and there's a separate motion to that effect, because the staffing model for this program includes 3 full-time employees, 1 for each of the 3 schools, and they have related employee benefits. The current revolving fund on the books, authorized by town meeting many, many years ago, does not allow for full-time employees or benefit costs to be paid directly from the revolving fund revenues. This separate revolving fund under this other statute does allow for that. So that would be the reason why we create that in the motion.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Pooler, would you like to add anything to that?
I just wanted to know if they wanted to distribute copies of the memo to which you referred. It
That'd be
has a
good, because you
org
mentioned the
chart
memo
sheet.
that
Yes.
Ms. Brewer.
Thank you.
That being my first question, and my second question was for us to remind the viewing public that this is going to be a different model than what we've done in the past, although this current year there is CDBG funding associated with those subsidies, which was in the amount of approximately $37,000. And that money was not recommended for the FY, but for the next round of block grant funds. So it was really important that we cover this so we didn't decrease participation by kids who definitely needed to participate, whose families needed to participate. But at the same time, we leveraged it into a better program overall based on all the discussions that have been had with the various providers and the consultant, et cetera. So we're not just filling a hole, but we are filling a hole, and we're hopefully making something better for everybody.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of different things going on here. One is the replacement of funds, as Ms. Brewer talked about, to ensure that we continue to be able to subsidize the tuition for low-income families for this program. Secondly is the program is going to be new and improved. That's not really our problem from the budget perspective right now. So there's the replacing the money, and there's talking about it in the context of the prioritized budget and restoration list. This segues into the budget coordinating group summary points, which you had in your last week's package, hopefully you have this week also. It is BCG's joint recommendation that this is the only additional budget item to be funded right now. This is the town manager and the superintendent's highest priority, and everyone is really working to stay within that what had been essentially a reduced budget level from our earliest projections, because at that time we were looking at less state aid than we were predicting. taking us back to the January discussion about the prioritized list, and taking us even further back to October, when the select board did the budget priority guidelines for the town manager, we were recommending that this be a year not of expanding programs, services, or personnel. So one of the reasons we put off the discussion of this list was to sort of see how things shook out. And there is new state budget news, and we'll get into that in a moment, but that just kind of complicates things. So first, I would just want to kind of keep us focused on the list itself. And so one of the things that we talked about back at the budget meeting was how the things are prioritized and whether we would want to reprioritize them. So on the one hand, we've got the recommendation from the town manager and the school superintendent that this is the highest priority, as has been the town manager's highest priority since the beginning. The select board and others had identified some concerns about some other items on this list and where they fell in the priority level based on the fact that they were essentially non-discretionary. You know, if veteran services went above the level that's budgeted, or if, do we have an overtime? I'm sorry.
The overtime was last year.
Oh, overtime was last year, okay, good. So, so maybe veteran services is the only one that's non-discretionary at this point. Mr. Santi and I have had numerous conversations about this, and basically your feeling is that we've budgeted very well, and so you're confident with the budgeting level, so notwithstanding where this falls on the list, you're not expecting to need to go work on the veteran services
That's right.
beyond the budget, because we have increased the funding in that budget
Yes.
in recent years, so we think that that's adequate. The other issues on here are kind of, these are things that in a perfect world we would have and that we're looking to do in the future, and not to put words in Mr. Musanti's mouth, but what you've talked about in the past is you want to get this out there in front of us and the public to know that these are things that we need down the road, that we need to be looking to restoring our public safety, staffing levels in the police department, to increase our staffing levels in the fire department, but this is not the year that the recommendation is to do that.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly right, and it's to increase awareness of need, but we're also need to proceed on a very cautious basis, given that we're still in a relatively precarious financial position as a town and in the greater economy. So, economic development, having a staff person, I still consider to be a very, very important initiative that the town should pursue. I'm continuing to explore potential partnerships and how we might fund such a position. So that's not ready yet, basically. The public safety staffing, yeah, there's a need. There's still some more work that's needed to analyze the best way to do that and how much, et cetera. So that one's not ready yet either.
So does select board have any comments on anything else about how these are prioritized and concerns about something other than the identified priority by the town manager and the school superintendent for this fund? Okay. So just general comments. A question, Ms. Stein?
Yeah, just a general comment. This is nothing from the capital budget is on this list. I just point that out because, as I'll report later, and Jim will also report later, there are lots of things that didn't get funded from capital that in some cases have a payback even and still could not be included. So I just want to make that up.
Thank you. Ms. Brewer?
2 items. One is, this list, of course, was in the big budget book, which is available online. In terms of increasing awareness, this is not in the finance committee book, right? There wouldn't be a purpose to it there. I wonder if we might consider publishing something, perhaps with a section on unmet capital needs. I realize that the capital plan usually shows the things shoved out to the side, so they're not gone altogether. But to remind people that these are priorities, I would not want to call it the prioritized list of budget restoration items anymore, but the, forward thinking toward FY14 stuff that's on the horizon that we know we're going to need to be dealing with over the next year. So that's just not something we've really done before, but I'm not sure if there's another way of getting that information into town meeting without confusing people into thinking that, oh, well, if we, if I hear in the news that we're gonna get some extra money, that means that item 3 is suddenly gonna be funded.
So I would say that the capital plan actually identifies a whole bunch
They
of
do
things
that.
that aren't funded.
Yeah.
I think that at what's going to happen at town meeting, if it follows typical pattern, is there will be some kind of statement from the town manager as well as school superintendent and library director who might allude to the things that they weren't
Right.
able to include in their budgets this year. I'd be a little bit wary about putting something like this out specifically because it looks like these are all the unfunded needs, where in fact if you knew you were putting out an unfunded needs
You'd
list, it
put
might
out
be a lot more
more.
comprehensive.
Right.
And it doesn't include the schools and libraries
Right.
stuff. So I think it's good
Okay.
in our ongoing discussions to keep referencing stuff like this, that there's all kinds of things that we would be paying for if we thought that we had the
Right.
means to do that at this point. But we don't want to kind of put the town out of sync with the other ones. But it's a good point. We get so close to these things that
Right.
we're really familiar with it, and the general public and town meeting might not kind of recognize the greater context of all the things that we don't fund, both capital and operations.
My other comment was, I wondered if the town manager would like to mention, and obviously we can come back to this at the budget point, but since it's right here on the restoration list, there has been some press associated with the firefighters indicating that their staffing need is perhaps being perceived as more grievous than we had expected. Grievous is the wrong word, because I don't want to talk about unions, but is of significant concern in terms of availability associated both with a large number of student calls, but also just in general. Is it appropriate to assure people that as we continue looking at the 24-hour schedule, et cetera, that more will come out of that and we will have a better understanding of what our needs are? Or is it simply that we don't think we have enough money to do more at this point, or we're sure we don't need to do more at this point? How would you characterize
Sure.
our?
I'd say a couple things. In the face of the worst recession in 70 years, and you look at the staffing levels of our town departments over the past 10 years that we've documented each fall in our fiscal trends report, while overall town of Amherst staffing is down 11%, I believe it is, over the past 10 years. There's been a net increase in public safety staffing, and in particular fire and EMS. While we were cutting in most other departments, we've added 5 firefighter EMT positions, and in the current year we've added another one as our inspector position has gone exclusively to inspections. We're replacing that with a line firefighter EMT. So that's the record, and it's in direct acknowledgement of the need and the rising call volume on the EMS side over the past 20 or so years. In my budget recommendations back in January in the big blue book, which is posted online, I make reference to some additional staffing analysis that Fire Chief Nelson and I will be doing in the coming year. On the basis of that, we'll come forward in the future with what we hope are appropriate staffing recommendations going forward. I'm very, very proud of all the work that our men and women do every day in our fire and ambulance service. It's one of the most highly regarded departments in the region, and it's well deserved. Call volume is growing, it's placing stress, and I think we've been very responsive to that need.
Okay, then any other comments on the budget and restoration? Mr. Wall?
Just in brief, as some of us know, there was a comment or a question on the town listserv about how the town does studies for all sorts of things,
from physical planning to other purposes, and it's useful to consider here that we went to the notorious outside consultants and got a study that got us a concrete budget outcome. So this is one example of how studies are actually used for purposes that I think all find laudable.
Thank you. Okay, anything else then about the recommendation? So this is recommended by budget coordinating group representatives who shared the priorities across the different budgets. And do we have a motion? I think we ought to vote to support the recommendation, and then later we'll be actually voting on specifically the incorporating that into the budget. So I'm not sure if we actually have a.
I don't think we do. If you want one.
In yellow.
Because that's the revolving fund.
Oh, you want us to do that now? Well, I was thinking it's more just sort of supporting the recommendation, but I guess that.
The revolving fund, yeah.
Ms. Brewer?
The revolving fund doesn't come before, or does it come before town?
Yes, it'll be
It's
part
well.
of, it'll be presented during Article 12.
Okay,
The current plan is to present it immediately following the community services budget
Okay.
appropriation vote.
all right, good.
It's
And so,
actually part of that vote.
It's part of the general budget vote.
Right, the money is, and so then there's the technicality
Yeah.
of the creation.
actually creating
All
the
right,
fund,
so-
I thought that had to be done that way. Okay, good. And then the only other comment I wanted to make is in regards to this lovely handout. Mr. Pooler can cover his ears now, because when I was at BCG, I was concerned about some of the expense sheets that are attached, because they are not particularly clear as to which of the 5 programs they're discussing. So for those of you who are not into all the arcane details, don't worry about it. But I would not, pass it out as some particular, the memo part and the chart are great. The numbers in the back, yeah, don't worry about that. Leave that to other people. But it does not explain how all different 5 programs are working out, and that's fine, because we don't need to know that. That's not our everyday thing, as Pete pointed out. But for people who are totally interested in those details, they can obviously contact the school, and they can get more details on how each program is working. And I'm sure that the consultant has some additional information that they could look at if they so chose to do so. But it's not necessary for town meeting to see any of this anyway.
Okay. All right, so we have general agreement, no opposition, so support for the town manager's recommendation from the restorations list. So that is by consensus, and we have the need to support or recommend the, this revolving fund thing. So since we're getting into the warrant articles right now, we might as well just do this because it doesn't fall so neatly. It doesn't, I'm trying to decide what makes the most sense here.
Some of these is part of this. That's why this is increased by 30,000.
At the bottom of page 36 in our finance committee book, it says approval of new
Yeah, I
revolving.
know, it's also the packet for that.
Okay, so actually, I think we're gonna put off this yellow motion on the motion sheet until we get into the operating budget. So, okay.
So actually, there it is.
Okay. So, that's the budget discussion, consideration of unfunded funds, so we're good with that, we support it by consensus. Now we're moving into voting and assigning select board positions on town meeting warrant articles, and we're starting with Article 8, FY12 budget amendments. And Mr. Pooler is here to talk with us about that. And I'll just note to the select board that everybody has on their, in their desk packets tonight, an updated assignment list, so in case you're following along with where we are, that's where we are. Okay, Mr. Pooler, budget amendments, what can you tell us?
Thank you. There are 3 amendments that will be presented under this article. At this time, we are still developing the exact numbers for Part A, which is the shift of monies between and among different parts of the budget. And the most important part of that is fully funding the collective bargaining agreements that we signed last December. The comptroller has been working out how much each functional area needs to be fully funded between now and the end of the year, including that transfer of, that's about $185,000. It's in general government reserve for wages and salaries, and transferred among the other areas. And when she is back in town next week, she will complete that work to see exactly what the balances are and what her projections are between now and the end of the year. So we will have a recommendation at town meeting on that. Part, motion B is the transfer of $91,508 from free cash to the Health Claims Trust Fund. This is money that, for which we received notification from the federal government that we're receiving that much reimbursement for the Medicare Part D benefit that we provide to retirees who are Medicare eligible for their prescription drugs. We had notification of this in September. That amount will become part of free cash at the end of this year. And what we've been doing in town meeting for 4 or 5 years now is, once we know that estimate, making a vote of that into the trust fund. And the reason it goes into the trust fund is the reimbursement is based on purchases of drugs by participants in the trust fund, and those include town employees, regional school employees, and town Pelham employees. So the trust fund benefits all of them, so that's where we put the money. So that's part B, and then part C is to appropriate $426,206 from free cash into the reserve fund to pay the costs associated with the October 2011 snowstorm. As you know, we had a big snow and ice storm in October. We incurred $426,000 of costs for the cleanup. And we have submitted to FEMA reimbursement requests that we estimate will cover at least 75%, if not more, of those costs. But the sort of paperwork is rolling along at its own pace. And after consulting with the comptroller and with our outside auditors in terms of timing for all of these things, we thought the safest thing to do was to make a full appropriation of the costs into the reserve fund, and that at the end of the year, the finance committee can make an appropriation from that reserve fund for the amount that we may still need net of whatever we know we're getting from FEMA. So it's somewhat of a timing issue to make sure we have everything covered before the end of the year. Anything that doesn't get used by the end of this fiscal year will revert back to free cash. And if for some reason the FEMA reimbursement is delayed beyond the summer, it will become part of next year's free cash. But our hope is that we will get it all in time so that we will appropriate no more than a quarter of this, and maybe even less depending what the final FEMA number is.
Okay, so we've got 3 parts. The first part you said is wholly or primarily collective bargaining. Make sure we can fund the collective bargaining.
Primarily, that as the comptroller has been monitoring spending, there may be some other little tweaks, but as a general matter, the bulk of this will be because of the collective bargaining settlements.
And that will be a transfer of monies, not an increase to the budget. It's just transferring from the reserve, salary reserve out to the various departmental budgets.
Right, and so part A is well, no matter what it might involve, is all transfers. It's just from one area to another.
Right.
And those figures are not in front of us anyplace here yet because it's still being gathered.
That's
But-
right.
And will be ready for town meeting, as it always is.
Correct.
So, but there's nothing that we know of at this point that's any sort of surprise that we would expect.
That's correct.
And so presumably the select board is comfortable approving part A even without an amount, because we know what the description is going to be, and our recommendation would not be based on what this.
Even if the finance committee isn't.
Right, those finance people, they really like to know the number.
Yeah.
All right, questions on part A, B, or C for Mr. Pooler? Mr. Hayden?
I just want to note that on part C, I guess that we need to do that because some of the bills will be due before the FEMA money would be available. So if we're going to pay our, the people who clean the stuff up and
Yeah, we've actually paid these bills, and we want to make sure by the time we close the books at the end of the fiscal year, we don't have a deficit.
Yeah.
Further questions? All right, Ms. Stein, would you like to make a motion on Article 8?
I wonder if we want to say parts A, B, and C
Sure.
in this? Okay. I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 8, parts A, B, and C, FY 12 budget amendments.
Second.
Further discussion?
Yes,
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. I would like to speak to budget amendments. This is one that we just have to say. Select board,
Sure, I can do
for all
that.
reasons. Okay, Ms. Brewer will speak to these. Thank you. And then, next up, then we have Article 12. This is the beginning of the operating budget. We're going to start with the community services budget. And we also have Waylon Greeny here, who is among the petitioners, who has put forth a petition regarding the community services budget, so we wanted to put both of those together. So Mr. Pooler could start with the community services budget, and then we'll talk about the petition concept.
Thank you. Community services budget is recommended at $1,692,882. And that, within that number is included the $40,000 we discussed a minute ago for subsidies for the after-school program. And I don't know how much detail you'd like me to go into about the budget, but this covers, this covers the budgets for public health, senior center, veteran services, LSSE, including the pools and the golf course. It is an increase of $117,000 from FY12, or 7.5% increase in the current year.
Does anyone have any questions about the operating budget for community services as proposed? Ms. Stein?
Do we have to read the part that's underneath it first to recommend for the operation of the after-school program before we do the whole budget? Or am I? It's actually,
I think those are separate items that
they are totally separate. Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
So Select Board has had the budget book since January, and we've been going through it with any questions we have sort of week by week. So we've had lots of opportunities to consider the community services budget and talk about it, so we have questions with that. Okay, so then Ms. Brewer.
This is just a technical question. So with the addition of this revolving fund, this will just be like a secondary motion under like a Part A to a motion or something? I'm just forgetting
At
how
town
this
meeting.
works. At town
Yes.
meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah, just more parts than usual.
Yes.
All right, so then before we vote on a recommendation for community services budget, Ms. Greeny, why don't you tell us about your petition article? So the petition article is to increase the community services budget line by an amount, and you'll talk about that. The way we expect this to be dealt with at town meeting is that you're actually going to make a motion under the community services budget consideration. Is that correct?
Good evening, my name is Waylon Greeny, and here I am representing the Housing for All group. And we discussed this warrant article today. And you just asked me what's our likely move at the town meeting floor. Originally, we wanted to be part of the process. So in October, we came to the select board meeting, wanted to be in the beginning of the budget season to talk about including this $66,000 of human services in the community service budget. However, that was not well received by the select board. So subsequently, in the January town manager budget, it was not included. So we felt in order to highlight a need for continuing funding as a historical track record the town has had, the reputation that we have starting in 1979. We had something called charitable funding committee at that time. So it's a 30-year track record that we support human services. So we felt that we need to bring this to the consciousness of the town meeting and the select board to highlight, A, it's the historical track record that Amherst citizens and town meeting, including the select board, have supported human services in the most, generous way, $193,000 at the height of this funding. And B is to continue to highlight, even though we do have the CDBG funding to help address some of the needs, but our continued position is that CDBG is not a reliable funding source. As you might be aware, this last round, 2 years ago, when we applied for the 6th round of CDBG, I quote, one of the staff members told the Human Service Network meeting about 3 weeks ago at the East Game Center that we barely squeezed by, meaning that the highest cutoff point is 29, and we had 28 points. So if we exceeded 28, then the town of Amherst would not have received the CDBG money. So the Citizen for All group continue to feel that funding for human service from the CDBG is not reliable. So based on the track record of the town select board and the citizens and the committees, we feel that we need to continue our good practice and to fund services that have been supporting the town's vulnerable populations. And as a person who is in the field doing this work, I want to assure you that basically every dollar the town contributes, the payback is tenfold. So for example, the Not Real Alone program, as I was the coordinator for over a dozen years, it received $6,000 from the town on average. And the budget was about $60,000 at the time. However, when we take into consideration of all the work and the food donation put forth by volunteers and Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, all that, it's $60,000 budget. If you include all those external benefits, we were providing over $100,000 of benefits to the community. So I use that as an example to show that the money you invest in a human service agency in Amherst, which meets the needs of people in different income categories, mostly on low income, you really reap the benefits. And the idea of where to find this money, every year for the past 3 years or 4 years now, we have the luck of the good management, financial management by our finance committee, finance director, Mr. Poole, and our previous finance director, Mr. Musanti. We were able to have $1 million return to the town coffer. So we feel it's justifiable given the needs and given that the surplus we have enjoyed. I would like to respectfully request that $66,000 out of the town's $66 million budget be appropriated for the purpose of aiding those who are vulnerable in terms of their food, shelter, and human service, all these things.
Okay, thank you. So you've gotten into kind of the guts of the proposal also, so that's good, and we'll touch on that in a moment. As far as how this is going to be dealt with at town meeting, it's presumably during the discussion of the community services budget, you're going to make a motion to increase the...
I'm sorry that I did not address this question. So there are two thoughts that we have now as a group. So we would make an amendment on the town meeting floor to increase the community service budget by $66,000. And then the motion maker will speak to this article. And maybe other invited speakers will come forth with permission of the moderator to provide additional witness testimony of the benefits of these programs. And if it does not get the support in this amendment discussion, then we would go back to regroup and check in with other human service entities and other constituents who have been benefiting from these services to ask whether we want to continue the Article 13 since it's already on the town warrant, whether we want to, at that point, to bring it to the town meeting floor. But there is the possibility if we feel that our sentiments is expressed and is heard, and there's a good support, but not voted in, then we would perhaps, just out of the grace not to take up more of the town meeting time, we might withdraw the article. So those are two positions that we have developed today.
Okay, so I just wanted to give select board some idea of how we're gonna be talking about this at town meeting, and so we will be talking about it as we are here in the context of the community services budget as recommended. Let's see, I'm gonna start here.
Mr. Overs first, I think.
Oh, go right ahead.
Spur talks a lot, you don't speak so much.
That's right, I get plenty of
She has
time.
more useful things to say. I guess my question, I mean, I think we all agree about the importance of human services, and we feel the pain of those who are not being served or whose services have been cut, and we feel the pain every time we work on these budgets. But I guess my question is, just to make clear, so if we're restoring $66,000 here, it's coming out of something else, right? And that's not part of the motion, is simply to put money in here, and then we would have to decide where we're taking it from. In other words, there's not money where we can draw upon. It's a zero-sum game.
Correct.
And because that's always been the issue too, and to manage the budget is a tough thing. To vote the money is easy, to find the money is harder.
Ms. Brewer.
Couple of points. One is that I think that we are going to continue to have to agree to disagree on the role of the town in human service funding. Certainly I was serving back in town meeting starting in 1999, and I'm aware of the many lists of agencies that we did fund. It was a program that seemed to work well. Unfortunately, just as we don't have as many town employees as we used to, there are things that we now do differently. And this has not been something I've been comfortable in insisting that the taxpayers fund from tax dollars, preferring that they go, that people who already are supporting these agencies continue to do so personally. I also share the frustration that block grant funding is only available to 5 agencies at any given time. We used to give relatively small grants to some agencies, and as Ms. Greenie pointed out, sometimes those very small amounts can actually be leveraged into larger amounts, but unfortunately that's what the federal state does to us in terms of that vibe. I do think it's not really quite accurate to state that no town funding has been appropriated to support any human service agencies. While it's true that block grant funds are not tax support, I think it's disingenuous to say that it's no town funding whatsoever. So I caution about using that terminology. One, I did also want to mention that, as Ms. Greenie pointed out, that this group did come before us in October, and I appreciate that they have been involved in the budget process through the time. This is not something that, as in past years, is just suddenly appearing on the floor or something we're hearing about the night we might be talking about it. I appreciate that there's a separate warrant article, and Ms. Greenie's outlined, on the one hand, we can try and be successful within this budget item. If not, then there's still the warrant article separately. And so I really appreciate taking it, full advantage of the process that's available so that everyone's aware of this going in, that it's no surprises to anyone. In terms of if we were to add that $66,000, which as I've indicated I do not support, technically the third item, community development in the finance, is that where we would add it back in, the line that we've zeroed out? Where would it go? Is that what we'd call it? I mean, I understand that it's for the total, but there is no such thing as other. There's public health, senior center, community development, veteran services, so would we just call it community development? Because it's not a pool, obviously. So, just from the technical standpoint, I think it's where that line's been zeroed out. On page 35, I'm guessing, would be where that was, where we'd still be doing it.
Yes. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the select board? Ms. Stein.
And this is under the former town manager.
Right.
When Human Services was switched from town to CDBG, there was an assurance that should that money be able to be delivered, we would still take on some human services financing, is the way I can best describe it. That we wouldn't leave human services in the lurch. And I'm just wondering what your thinking is. I want to be fair because it wasn't your switch, so you
Right.
weren't the one making it. But I'd like to know what you have to say about that.
Well, I don't have the authority to bind a future select board or town meeting to a course of action. I share the value set, I think, of the community that the services provided are very important. Because we are receiving close to $1 million a year now in community development block grant monies that we weren't receiving just a few years ago, and a portion of that funding, about $200,000, can be spent on human services. We're spending more in total than we have in many, many years on human services. So to the extent that that program is drastically cut or the town becomes not eligible in a given year, then that would be part of the conversation about priorities for funding needs going forward. One of the things we're funding that we're all very proud of is our emergency shelter, which takes roughly half of the human services money from our block grant. That was a commitment we weren't making 3 years ago that we are now. So it has shifted. It has shifted.
I would just build on Mr. Musanti's point a little bit, that at this point, while the community development block grant money is as unstable as any of our other funding sources at this point, to make a decision in advance of that situation changing seems, to me, not necessary. Should we lose our community development block grant status, then it would be for the select board, for the community to consider how do we address those needs going forward. And that would involve the things that we currently fund with the block grant money, as well as the other opportunity, the other possibilities that are out there. And I'll just remind us that kind of we're having this conversation in the context of having just had the discussion at our last meeting about the cost of living adjustments that we give to our employees. I have the historical record here over the time that Ms. Greene is talking about. When we first started funding the different human service agencies, those were also times when we were giving considerably more money to the employees. So that's an area that we've had to cut back. We're just talking about our public safety needs in the police department, as well as fire and ambulance. That would be part of the context that we're talking about of these different funding priorities. We just talked about the unfunded list, as well as both operationally and for capital in the town budget. So it's in this greater context that we would have to have these conversations, and certainly we would. Having that in advance of having our CDBG status change, making a decision rather, not the consideration, but making a decision differently in advance of our CDBG status changing seems premature and unnecessary to me, because we really are spending considerably more money on human services than we have spent in past years, in particular to these outside agencies. And as Mr. Musanti said, we've increased our profile in town-provided services essentially through the winter emergency shelter. So I also appreciate that Ms. Greene brought the same request to us back in the fall when we were considering the budget priority guidelines, for the very same reasons that we did not prioritize it at that time. I personally would not be prioritizing it also now. I think it's very important that we kind of keep our eye on these things, but I don't see a reason to change what had been our recommendation or what has been our recommendation so far, that this is not a year that we're changing our profile in these funding areas. And I would also just say that this thing about returning $1 million every year to the general fund So, as select board will recall, when we have our end of year budget review with Mr. Pooler and Ms. Aldridge, we talk about the different amounts of money, the teeny slivers of all of the little budgets that have come back at the end of the year that equal something like 1%, just over 1%, or just under 1% of the budget. When we talk about it as $1 million, it sounds like some big dramatic thing that we can, we take it from that excess fund of $1 million. This is a tiny bit of money from all over the budget areas that has to do with positions that aren't filled, et cetera. I don't understand why sometimes it comes up like this, that this is this $1 million as though we budgeted this additional funds. When we're projecting, and by we, I mean Mr. Pooler, Mr. Musante, the Finance Committee, other folks, when they're projecting the revenues and the expenses for the coming year to come within almost 1% of accuracy is extraordinary. And when you think about what the options are, you're either going to land exactly right, which is impossible, or you're going to be hopefully 1%-ish on either side. You certainly don't want to be 1% below, such that we have budgeted inappropriately, and now we're in a hole. So we come up approximately 1% above, which I think is really extraordinary budgeting, and I'm really uncomfortable with it being discussed as though we're budgeting for a surplus every year. What we're doing is budgeting with great conservatism, and it's why we have been fortunate and not found ourselves really behind the 8 ball at the end of the year. So I think that's really to be praised, and not to be talked about as though this is some extra money we should be spending ahead of time. I don't even know how you would do that. I mean, where would you pull $1 million from? You can't, because it's coming from a couple of bucks here and there and everywhere. So okay. So is there a recommendation then on the community services budget, which will also make a recommendation on Article 13? So I would say the sentiment, as I'm sensing it from the slide, is that we're going to be supporting the community services budget at the amount that we talked about previously, with that additional $40,000 for the after-school programs, thank you, and to not support Article 13, a petition to add additional money. Ms. Brewer.
I just want to make sure I have this right. So Mr. Pooler, on page 35, the line item for leisure services, that does include the $40,000 that we keep talking about. So the bottom line total is the right total.
Yes, you're referring to line 35 of the Finance Committee report.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's within the LSSE line of the 522, 331. That's where that 40,000 is, and therefore that's why it's that total. Okay, good. Just making
Other
sure.
questions or comments then before, I'm just going to call Ms. Sweeney and then we'll.
About this, or about
Yes.
any specifics? Or?
If you're in doubt, ask your question.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say that I guess one difference would be also that if memory serves, at the suggestion of Mr. Weiss, town meeting did take up a restoration of one piece of a social service item that was missing with the Cambodian outreach worker, right? Was that 2010, I believe?
Did that ever get removed from the budget? That was a giant mess under the old town manager.
But anyway, I guess my point is, in that case, someone came to us with a very specific request saying, we've been promised certain things would happen, this is not being done, and we took it up specifically. Whereas I guess the difference here is this is asking to restore a lump sum for general purposes. In other words, that was one of those cases where somebody saw a clear need, something had fallen through the cracks in the way that the town had said it would.
The town share of costs for that program is in the budget.
Yes.
Right, and so your greater point, I think, is that town meeting expresses, and community members express their opinions loud and clear, and that stuff ends up in the budget, and that we are responsive to when things change.
Right.
So in fact, the CDBG money is in response to the
Right.
fact that that was back when we were cutting the budget dramatically. We did huge cuts the year that we eliminated that funding and found a new way to pay for those services, which was through the community development block grant. So the whole budget process is responding
Right.
to these needs. So this is,
Right, that wasn't anticipatory.
right.
And I guess I would just add in passing, I mean, it's too bad in a way that so much of this goes back to private initiative, but we do have things such as the Love Notes fundraiser by the Amherst Club every spring, which benefits precisely social service agencies. Some of them very much appreciate this, but they've kind of small bits that we can't give out to the CDBG because of the 5 organization limit, so.
Thank you, Mr. Heaton.
I just also want to sort of, as a wrapping up comments for me, I want to say that I appreciated being challenged by Article 13 or Article 12A amendment, however that ends up being, because it goaded me into sort of taking it apart, saying, are we doing enough? I mean, is 66, well, it's a nice number, it's an interesting number, but where would it go? Or where is it going already? We've talked about how CDBG, we wouldn't have talked about that as thoroughly otherwise. We wouldn't have understood as well what services are being provided, what services we intend to provide one way or another, CDBG being the current way. But you know, I look at the 7, 8 items that are in the fund now. These are services that are getting funded that do help these very people. And Article 13 has offered us the opportunity to articulate, to be out, to say out loud that public health, the senior center, community development, veteran services, leisure services are all being supported either with tax money or in another chapter someplace else with other monies. That's work that we're doing. And I'm glad that we're able to say that.
Thank you. And just to express further, that some of the agencies that are no longer getting direct funding from community development block grant do have other financial arrangements with the town. It would be nice if we could quantify what the situation is with Center for New Americans and Big Brother Big Sister, who had renovations made to their space and very favorable lease terms with the town in the Bang Center. So these are other ways. It's not that we've left these places high and dry. We've tried to find other ways that the town can use its resources and its strengths to support them, because all of these agencies really are critical to how the town functions. And Ms. Berman.
Yes, I would compliment the Finance Committee on including under their position on Article 13. They do mention, although it doesn't have a great amount of detail, they do mention the rented space at affordable cost. And that, without the dollars attached, might be useful for town meeting, but they did cover that on page 50, and I think that is incredibly important to point out. One thing I just wanted to mention, the petitioner, in case you might not be staying for the entire time, is that the only piece of paper that we have received, to the best of my knowledge, associated with Article 13 and this motion under the community services budget is what's going out in the 3rd town meeting mailing today, which happened to be delivered to us tonight. And at least the version I have of that is the exact same information on both sides of a piece of paper. It's not 2 different sets of information. So you might just
Would you
be
like me to
aware of
clarify
that.
that? Would you like me to clarify, explain that?
Sure.
Okay, the reason is that on the first version, we failed to put the petitioner's name in the group on it. So the town staff was kind enough to alert us. So she was kind enough to print the version, include the petitioner's name on it, and not to waste any
Right.
paper.
So it's just the
So we
head.
put it on the same piece of paper. So I appreciate our town staff being very resource-minded.
So it wasn't that you intended there to be a different set of information
Thank
on the
you.
back.
Yeah.
Good, I'm glad to hear
Okay.
that.
So if I could make a couple points here.
Sure.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Hayden for his keen comment about in the community service line items that what we are supporting, such as leisure service, senior center, etc. Health. So it shows that these are areas we pay attention to, and we are proud that we are supporting them. So that leads to the comment here I'm going to make that how about the people who have less means to be able to make, a good, decent meal at home, have a roof over their head. So how about these people? So that's one question I'm puzzling out. As a taxpayer, I heard recently in Tennessee, where I used to live, the fire department has this interesting thing. they do not respond to fire call unless you pay $100 $100 fee in advance. And one time, this one household failed to pay that, so they didn't come to put out the fire. So when they did come, eventually, the house was burned down, but they still charge them $3,500. So the cautionary tale is, it's terrible to reach that point unless you pay money in advance before your fire department will come. So in that town, they can't afford to have fire department service. And in our town here, regardless whether you pay or you don't pay, you will have fire truck come to you and pay and then put out the fire. So it's just the value. So we really appreciate public safety. So therefore, we have fire department service come to us. We do not have the requirement that you have to pay the fee. So on the same token, if you really value those who have less means than you and I have sitting in this room, then let us consider putting a line item there that says that we value you. We would like to help you to be part of this community. So that's what I want to put on the table. And I also want to say my appreciation for Ms. Stein asking this poignant question when the CDBG does get eliminated because of very competitive process. And this is the year this is going to happen. This is the 7th time the cycle will come up, and we will know, I think, by July, from what we were told at that meeting, that we would know whether we will be qualified for the CDBG this round or not. So when that does happen, if we are no longer qualified for the CDBG, so what that means is in 2013, that we will have no funds for the shelter, which we are so proud of. So these are 2 points I'd like to add to the discussion. Thank you.
I want to be clear on, town managers, finance directors, select board members. We spend a portion of our day lobbying other levels of government, usually for money, including the federal government. We have a commitment from the federal government for CDBG funding for the federal fiscal year that begins October 1st, 2012. And that's the list that I presented for discussion purposes to the select board back in the fall following the CDBG advisory committee review of applications for money. We submitted the block grant proposals to the state and feds. That has been approved. The issue is what happens the following fiscal year and beyond. So as that program is reauthorized and communities reapply for this mini entitlement. But the budget that's before town meeting is fiscal year 13, July 1, 2012 to June 30, 2013. The CDBG money that's been allocated to the town that covers that period is secure.
That's correct. That's
That's
understood. Yeah. But just looking ahead.
All right, I think we're ready for a motion on the community service budget and Article 13.
Okay. I move that the select board recommend to the Amherst 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget, community services in the amount of $1,692,882.
Second.
Further discussion. So I'll just note that, again, that is the original amount plus the 40,000 that we talked about from the restorations. All right, all in favor say aye.
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 And that's unanimous. And there's also on Article 13, right below the yellow.
Okay.
And I'll do the.
Okay. I move that the select board not recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 13, petition article, restoration of a line item for union services in FY13 budget.
Second.
Further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in.
Thank
We'll see
you.
at town meeting. Okay, so now let's let's do this one in yellow so that we're
Okay.
official. This is the establishing the revolving fund. This time,
Okay,
would you
I
like to say
think
something
one
else?
of the reasons that I could vote against the motion that I just voted against is because we are putting the funding in now. And we have to see what happens in the future, but I would, that's all I have to say. Okay, the one in yellow is to set up the revolving fund. I move that the select board recommend that the town establish a revolving fund pursuant to MGL Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2, for the operation of an after-school program from which the receipt shall be credited for expenditure by the LSSC department, as authorized by the department head of the LSSC or his or her designee for supplies and services, including salaries and benefits of staffing and related administrative costs for the program operation with a limit of $400,000 that may be expended from said revolving fund in the fiscal year which begins on July 1st, 2012.
Second.
Further discussion, Mr. Musi.
Can I just suggest to the board that the motion be tweaked so that after the word recommend on the top line, that we add the same phraseology as the budget, other budget recommendations, that it's recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12 FY13 operating budget with the remainder. So it's consistent.
Because that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, second.
Further discussion. Is there a good explanation for this? The memo that you handed out to us already, that's not in the town meeting packet, right?
No.
Not yet.
There is an explanation in the finance committee report.
Okay, all right, which I only received when I walked in tonight, so I haven't looked at it yet. Okay, good, I'm just making sure that people are going to understand what's a fairly complicated. All right, further discussions. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's
It's the
unanimous.
amended.
That is right, as amended. Okay, so, so now we're in the operating budget stuff. Usually one person just speaks to the various parts of the operating budget as about why we recommend the recommendation. And we don't have to go into great detail about it because finance committee does. So somebody
Get
like
into
to
that.
adopt the operating budget as their
What they said.
thing to say,
Yeah.
speak to? Anyone? Ms. Brewer, you always do the operating budget.
Do I? Okay, all right, I
Okay.
guess I'll do it again.
Excellent.
What
Thank
a
you for
good idea.
volunteering. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that.
All right, moving right along. We are, where's
Well,
my
we have
agenda?
more operating, but
We have
Plenty
plenty
more
more.
operating. We have plenty more. Where that came
Let's
from.
see, so, okay, so let me just tell folks how this is gonna work. So we have, as long as we stand to be here tonight, but Mr. Pooler is also coming back to our meeting next week. So if we find that this is getting very long, we can just postpone any parts of the operating budget that we haven't gotten to. I don't expect the rest of this to take very long, but in case it does, we can postpone any of it until next week, which is to say Monday, 5 days from now. And I know Ms. McGinnis is here to speak about the petition article. I believe the petitioner has been contacted and is expected to be here tonight also, because, okay, so.
Is there a time for
Yeah, I
that?
was gonna work that.
It's not a specific time, but, so my thing is, I can't let Ms. McGinnis go home yet because, we can't deal with hers so that she can go home because we don't have the petitioner here, and I presume the petitioner is gonna come in. Okay, so moving right on to the other parts of Article 12, FY13 operating budget, starting with public safety.
Public safety budget is recommended at $8,877,651. It's an increase of 4.5%, or $380,000. And there are really no changes in personnel. The increased costs that really have to do with collective bargaining increases. Otherwise, expenses are pretty much level funded in these areas. Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. Ms. Brewer?
Just to follow up on something the town manager mentioned earlier about the inspector position, so I know we've talked about that in the past. When did that take effect? that we were able to move, you know, the firefighter who was doing inspections, so that now we have a firefighter, but we're not actually increasing. How does that work?
It's part of the new collective bargaining agreement with the firefighters union. The person doing the inspector role has been in that role. It was now formalized in that bargaining agreement. The line firefighter is expected to start work later this spring for the town.
Other questions about public safety? Again, we've sort of already had the conversation about the funding that we would like to do in the future to increase both the police force as well as the fire and ambulance force, but that's not the recommendation this year. All right, Ms. Stein, would you like to make a motion?
Sure, I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget, public safety in the amount of $8,877,651.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. We have public works.
You're gonna assign people as you go, or what?
Oh, yeah, sorry. No, Ms. Brewer, I think is gonna do them all.
She's just lucky that
Yeah.
way. And when she's really lucky, she just gets to say what they say. Yes.
That's okay. In that case, the public works budget is recommended at $1,996,684. It's an increase of 2.9% or $55,454. And again, no change in FTEs, and operating expenses are level funded.
Okay. One of the things on the restoration list, we didn't go into detail about this now, we did talk about it in January, was the idea that over the years, a certain amount of DPW work has been moved to project-based funding, which is a complication for DPW. And again, that's something that we would like to move away from, because that covers a whole bunch of kind of day-to-day stuff, the filling of potholes, et cetera. But we're not able to do that this year. Is there any, having not having not recommended the funding of that from the restoration list, does any of that change for this year, or we would need to wait until next year's budget to make a change in that situation?
I'm recommending we wait, although it's a need. The primary, well, look at it two ways. During the worst of our economic downturn, we were able to retain staffing levels in DPW, but it came at a cost of reduced flexibility about how that workforce is allocated, because some of these dollars are dedicated from projects. The work needs to be allocated to those projects, which gives the superintendent less flexibility to allocate the workforce, particularly in some of our seasonal needs like potholes and things like that. So it remains a need. We're just not in a financial position yet to do anything about it in the coming year.
So that's just a good reminder to folks about all the things that we are also not funding, needs that we're not funding in the larger context of this budget. Okay, questions, other questions or comments about the public works budget? Ms. Stein.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget, public works in the amount of $1,996,684.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, I say thank you, Alyssa.
She's, if you get to a point that you're not willing to do it, just
Yeah,
call
it's
us.
fine. It's fine.
All right, next up, we have conservation development.
Conservation development is recommended at $927,560, which is an increase of 4.7% or $41,698. The FTEs are unchanged and the operating expenses are level funded.
Anyone have any questions about conservation and development budget? Ms. Stein?
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget, conservation and development in the amount of $927,560.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 It's unanimous.
Mrs. Clerk, are we planning on, when we get to town meeting, will we be working through the book in order? Just because I noticed we went community services, public safety,
What is
public
the order?
works, and then we went backwards to conservation and development. Do you know?
I can't remember how I put these in order, but last I knew, Finance Committee had not determined the order that, has that
So
been?
last
determined
week
yet?
they did, it's reflected in the finance committee report. And in
That's so
general,
handy.
what they did is, they took two drawings, lotteries. One as between library, schools, and town, which one of those three would go first. And then within town, which one of the elements would go first. And the general idea was, general government always goes last because if there's amendments to other functional areas, sometimes. And then they wanted to put public works second to the last, because, so it would be right next to the enterprise funds. And then what they did is they looked at the order of conservation and development, community services, and public safety, and saw what order they were last year, and they just moved everybody up one. And number one went to the end, and number two went to number one, and so forth. So a little merry-go-round with the idea that every year they would sort of rotate those three.
So, what?
And just a reminder to folks what that's about. So
Yes.
again, this is kind of the town and finance committee and everyone being responsive to what the community's desires and priorities are. This was an issue that was raised by town meeting coordinating committee several years ago. There was some concern that perhaps the order in which the budget areas were considered might influence, thank you, influence the discussion and how whatever kinds of budget amendments might happen, favoring ones that came earlier or something like that. So to give everyone sort of an equal shot at being considered in first or last or whatever, Finance Committee has been very responsive to that, so they do this lottery system. So it's a good question, good to clarify, and good to know that the order in the Finance Committee report is how that will be considered at town meeting. All right. Let's see, what happened? Have we had a motion yet? Where are
We
we?
did conservation and
Or
development.
general government.
Conservation development, and so we
now
voted on
We did
that
that
already.
Yes.
So now we're
Okay.
general government.
Thank you.
Yes.
The general government recommendation is $6,088,418, which is a reduction of 0.01% or $3,059. And the reason for the reduction is substantially because of reductions in the line items for employee pay and benefits, and specifically, since we have all of our collective bargaining contracts settled, there is no money in a salary reserve for FY13. All the salaries are now allocated to the functional areas in the departments, and so that money comes, is no longer has to be budgeted within general government, so it's an overall decrease because of that. If it weren't for that decrease, the other departments were increased by 3.8%. And again, that reflects the allocation of salary and collective bargaining changes among those departments. It also reflects a slight bump in the elections department because we have one more election next year.
Questions or comments about the general government budget? And again, this is a book we've been poring over for many months, so if you have questions, we will answer, asking them along the way. All right, then, Ms. Stein, make a motion on general government.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12 FY13 operating budget, general government in the amount of $6,088,418.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 It's unanimous. Next, general fund indebtedness.
So these are the interest and principal payments for bonds that the town has already sold. And it's recommended that we spend $1,827,368. Of that, interest is $1,432,240, and principal is $395,128. And I would just note that the numbers here are slightly different than what they were in the manager's budget, because the manager's budget, we made some estimates of what our bond sales are going to be, and in fact, we did sell those bonds, and we know the exact dollar amounts, and so these reflect the bond sales from March.
So did that number go up or down from the manager's budget?
That went up by $1,000.
Good estimating. All right, further questions then on general fund indebtedness?
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY 13 operating budget, general fund indebtedness in the amount of $1,827,368.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Next up, we have enterprise funds.
And the water fund is on page 44 of the Finance Committee report. And the appropriation recommendation there is $3,498,354. Again, that is slightly different from what you saw in the town manager's budget, because we sold our water debt in March, and it came in less than what we had estimated by about $40,000. So this budget is about $40,000 less than we saw in the January budget. Overall, it's a 9.4% decrease in the total amount of spending in this area. And I'll just say one more odd word about the enterprise funds. If you look in the Finance Committee report, you see there's a gray line that has that $3,498,000. There's another number right below that, $427,641. That's the amount of reimbursement that the water fund makes to the general fund for the activities of general fund departments. And so the total spending within the department that's supported by rates and the extent that you ever use surplus funds, which we're not using this year, we're spending $3.9 million, but because of the way the Department of Revenue requires us to report these appropriations, we appropriate the total minus that general fund subsidy. So it's a little bit of an odd way of doing it, but it keeps us out of trouble with the DOR by doing it that way, and everything gets spent the way it's supposed to be spent.
Questions about the water fund? The free cash balance in the water fund is gonna be a little over $1 million. Are there norms that's based on? Or
It's based on for many years in setting the rates, the town has tried to keep a balance of about $1 million in both the water and sewer fund. Partly because once you sort of have a certain balance, you don't want to be drawing it down too much or building it up too much for that matter. As a general matter, it represents a couple of months of activities, so that is kind of a rule of thumb, a good number to have. So it's a combination of not deviating from the status quo and a general good rule of thumb. The town has not adopted an official policy on water and sewer fund or enterprise fund balances, although the Finance Committee has had some discussions and may do that in the future.
Other questions or comments on the water fund? Stein?
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY operating budget water fund in the amount of $3,498,354.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Sewer fund.
The sewer fund appropriation recommendation is $3,652,855, which is an increase of 6.4%. And again, I would note that this is slightly higher than the number that was in the manager's recommended budget because when we sold debt in the winter, we estimated that the debt for the Harkness Road design would be 20-year debt. When we went to actually sell the debt, our financial advisor recommended, because it was such a small portion of that project, that we sell that as 10-year debt. So we're actually paying that debt off quicker, so the costs are a little bit higher upfront, and that accounts for the difference between the two budgets.
Other questions or comments on sewer? Ms. Stein?
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget sewer fund in the amount of $3,652,855.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, it's unanimous. Solid waste.
Recommendation for solid waste is $549,855, which is a 0% increase.
All right. Questions or comments on solid waste? So solid waste is a fund with concern. This is our the future of the transfer station
Right.
situation, and so the fund balance here is a worry, right? So we're down to $53,000 in the solid waste fund balance.
We're using
Oh, I'm
$53,000,
sorry, we're using 53.
which is about half of the current
Yeah,
balance.
thank you. What does this look like for the future?
Well, as you said, and we described in January, it's very, very tight. We have a long-term recycling, refuse management committee actively looking at the future of the transfer station, the future of services at the landfill site. There's a citizen survey that is about to go out, gauge community interest in recycling needs and other services at the transfer station, and whether to continue along the same lines of services there. And that'll be a major focus over the coming year.
Do you expect this to look much different as a recommendation next year, or do you think that's still as far in the future?
Don't know yet. Don't know yet. I am on one of our landfill sites, the old landfill, as you all know. We're trying to do some development there to get into the renewable energy business with solar that would generate substantial cost savings to the town, which would conceivably could be partially applied to sustaining our recycling or enhancing our recycling program going forward. That's funded out of our solid waste fund, which at current trends will require general fund tax support in the near term, meaning in the next 3 years, if we keep doing same old, same old.
But not this year, so
But not this
we're covered this year. Any other questions or comments about solid waste fund budget? That's fine.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget solid waste fund in the amount of $549,855.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Transportation fund.
Recommendation for the transportation fund is $984,383, which is an increase of 0.8%.
And so the transportation fund, I just put my book away. One of the things that's happening in this fund this year is the bid, the money for the bid.
Yes.
And another thing that's happening in this fund is we talked last meeting about Boltwood Place and what the expected parking situation would be for the folks who are gonna live there. Is there any projection in this fund for this year? Anything about new revenue from leased parking spaces or anything related to Boltwood Place, or the fact that the market for those, the market value of those spaces, hence the lease cost, might go up if there's more demand?
We expect Boltwood Place to begin from the development team at Boltwood Place. They're expecting occupancy by early summer, which would mean the parking spaces on that side of the Boltwood lot, which are currently closed to the public, would be put back into service on or before the start of this fiscal year. So we've made the assumption that those spaces would be revenue producing throughout the year in the development of this budget. In terms of lease spaces, I know Boltwood Place will be leasing a portion of our existing leased spaces. So the revenue from those leased spaces in the lower level of Boltwood Garage is also assumed here. Just might be a different mix of renters, leasers, lessees.
But the revenue from it would remain
Yes.
even? Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions about transportation?
Okay, I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 12, FY13 operating budget transportation fund in the amount of $984,383.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 It's unanimous. Okay, so then we've got capital, but before we do that, let's talk about Article 30. So the petitioner was notified, you're pretty sure about that. And so he's not here. Let's talk about it anyway. We'll give him the opportunity to come in and get us to change our minds or whatever later. But since we have two staff folks here who can speak to this. Article 30 is a petition article that is seeking to have the town invest its money solely in Massachusetts-owned banks, and also kind of a separate question to ask the legislature to create a Bank of Massachusetts for, is it state funds to be invested in, or for local municipal funds to be invested in? Both, okay. And so we have a memo from Treasurer and Collector Claire McGinnis about this, and also we have some opinion from the Finance Director about this. It's unfortunate that we don't have the petitioner here to speak to it, but if folks have read the warrant article, then they get a sense of it. So clearly this is in response to the financial crisis, the mortgage crisis, the things that have been happening with big corporate banks over the last several years. And so this is a way to try and kind of put our money where our mouth is, quite literally, on this issue. But the logistics are more complicated than that. So if I can't really represent the petitioner's position on this, but you know, it's to try and sort of keep your money local and not be supporting the evils of corporate banking. But the local logistical issues are more complicated, so would you folks like to speak a little bit to that in whatever order?
Claire McGinnis, the Collector Treasurer, put together a very nice memo outlining the sections of the general law that define where cities and towns can put their money. It's a highly regulated area. I will let her answer questions. She can maybe just give a 2-minute overview without going into excruciating detail. Because, as I say, it's highly regulated. There are very clear definitions of where you can and cannot put your money. Plus, I think Claire can talk to what our practices have been that go above and beyond what the law requires in terms of putting things out to bid and so forth. And then you have this in your packet. It's a very nice chart that shows where we put our money and how much is local now. So, Claire, do you want to just take a minute to just give an overview, and then if people have some specific questions, and then we can both address some of the policy aspects.
Sure. I don't want to repeat the information here because you've had it for a few days to read through. I would just reiterate that the way the article is written is extremely restrictive, and it doesn't define what a Massachusetts bank means. It says operates in Massachusetts. That's not clear. Is it located in Massachusetts? Does it do business only in Massachusetts? And what does it mean to do business only to have branches or to reinvest all their capital? Or it's basically, at least I think, sort of an unsolvable conundrum presented there, because we don't have a definition for operating solely in Massachusetts. I think it's extremely restrictive, and there's a lot to think about when we invest our cash on hand. We have to think about how it's insured, what percentage of our assets is in each institution, what category of investment device we're using. All of those elements are addressed in an investment policy, which is in its draft form, which Sandy and I have worked on, and will come to the Finance Committee as well as Select Board sometime when you're a little less busy with town meeting. So it's just not as simple as the very nice idea, which is let's keep our money local and do good things in the community. It's just not that simple. And I would just reiterate that it would be extremely disruptive to have to respond to that type of a restriction within our current operation.
So I'll just add a couple of things. The mantra of investment for public treasurers is safety, liquidity, and yield. In that order, make sure that municipal funds are safe, liquid, i.e. you can get at them reasonably quickly when you need them and that they're not tied up for long periods of time. And then finally, yield, in other words, what interest rate you're getting on them. The law mandates that that's how Claire invests money. She is bonded so that as long as she follows those rules, even if she loses money on an investment, she's protected by the bond. If she were to stray from these requirements, then she would stray from that bond and she would be vulnerable. So we don't want to put her in that position. But having said that, I think if you look at the back here, you'll notice that most of these accounts, these are savings accounts, or more likely CDs, where we keep the bulk of our money. The bulk of our money, 76%, is in institutions that at least are headquartered in Massachusetts. The petition article talks about exclusively in Massachusetts, and frankly, we don't know what that means, but at least we know people who have banks that have their headquarters here. And as you'll see, quite a few of them are local: East Hampton, Florence, Greenfield, Holyoke, and so forth. And that's, I think, for the very practical reason that, and you've probably seen this yourself, if you're looking to put money in a bank, you're going to get a better yield from a local community bank than you are from a big national bank. And so this is sort of a problem that we don't have in terms of investing in the big national banks because they're not good investments. So just naturally, we've already invested the bulk of our money there. There are a couple of accounts which are what we call our business accounts, where we process our checks, our payroll checks, and our vendor checks, which aren't necessarily, particularly People's Bank. It's not necessarily it's a Connecticut bank. These banks, you have to use a big commercial bank to do those things. You can't just use a mom and pop local bank. And over the years, the town has followed a policy of going out through a bidding process, even though we're not required to do that, we have gone out and we've gotten very favorable, very good rates from these banks. If you have specific questions, Claire can talk about the fee structure, but, and so then finally I would just conclude by saying from a policy point of view, as Claire mentioned, she and I have done a lot of work on an investment policy which we think would round out the finance policies that the town has already adopted. It's our intention to present that to the finance committee and have that become a complete part of our finance policies. Within that would be discussions of obviously obeying the law, but also how we take into consideration where we are investing our money. And we think that that is probably the best vehicle for having this discussion and for incorporating any kind of policy such as the one that's contemplated in this article. And it's my understanding, and I think I'll know this more tomorrow night for finance, that the petitioner is amenable to that sort of solution, to having part of this article referred back to finance so that it can be taken up within the discussion of our investment policy. The other part about the bank is more in the nature of a resolution, and finance is not much opined on that. I don't know where that's going to go, but I'd say that's, there's an article in the New York Times Saturday, I think 3 weeks ago, about the Bank of North Dakota that was created in 1900 something or other that this is sort of based on. And so if you want to see what North Dakota was like when it was a socialist state, you can read about it creating its own bank and keeping out out-of-state bankers. And for North Dakota back then, it actually seemed to work pretty well and keeps going now. I think that's sort of the genesis of some of this idea.
Ms. Burke?
Are there no credit unions on this list simply because they were not as competitive, or are there some reasons we're not allowed to use credit unions?
They're not listed as eligible institutions.
So we simply can't.
Correct.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Hayden?
Yeah, just I'm wondering, reading this, it's pretty arcane banker's language here. Chapter 44, section 55 allows this, 55B allows that. It raised the question, it seems to suggest that it's likely, I was going to say possible, but I think it's more likely that the Part 1A of the resolution might leave you, Claire, particularly, in a bit of a bind. It's possible that we might be requiring you to do something which is not legal, or would take special dispensation. Is that a little bit too broad a reading of this?
Do we have an opinion from council yet?
Okay. I mean, that was my first concern. I said, oh my goodness, if we're going to require you to do something, what happens if state law already requires you to not do that?
That's why I think we've tried to emphasize that this is a highly regulated area. We don't know for sure what the Attorney General would have to opine on this if this did pass town meeting in its present form, to see if it is in conformity with current law. And that's why I think if we have the option of incorporating these principles, to the extent we think they're good principles, within an investment policy rather than a bylaw, that's a much better way to go, so that we don't run into a position that we're putting our treasurer collector in a potential conflict with state law.
And so I think that point is kind of the key one here, that this is, the spirit behind the petition raises a lot of good issues that that encourage us to look at our financial policies. We have these financial policy guidelines that the various bodies all signed off on several years ago, and in various ways we talk about looking at them and updating them. And so this is another way that they should be looked at and updated, and that concepts like this are best expressed as a policy rather than a bylaw, for all the reasons we've talked about, it being very restrictive, it being potentially illegal, things like that. So to go the policy route, especially with a referral back to finance committee or whatever on this article, I think would make most sense. Ms. Stein?
I was just going to say, would it be good to recommend that this be referred back to the finance committee? Or just let it be not recommended? What's your preference?
It would be my preference to have it go to finance. I hope that that's what the petitioner would agree to, but we don't have a final word on that. We've had some indications that that's a direction in which we're heading. But I think in terms of a recommendation to town meeting, that makes a lot of sense. I think it really is the most thoughtful and comprehensive way to deal with this issue.
So to refer it back to the finance committee for further work. Okay.
So we would, so the way we might think about this is supporting that if the motion is made, hoping that motion is made, to refer it back to the finance committee. We could also do that referral ourselves if we prefer to do that. I think it makes the most sense to come from the finance committee and or the petitioner.
Right. And I would also add that I think 1A definitely belongs within the finance committee because that's a finance policy. The whole issue of this bank, I don't know what the finance committee is going to do on that. It's not clear that that resolution would have any financial impact on the town one way or the other, so the finance committee may not take a stand on it because they typically don't take stands on things that don't have a financial impact. So I know it's slicing the salami pretty thin here, but I think there's a distinction between the different parts of the petition article.
So how about to not recommend it as in its current form?
Fine with that too.
Yeah, so I think, do we need to parse out,
Another form in which we recommend?
I'm sorry?
Is there another form in which we ever recommend or not recommend?
Those are only two
Well,
options?
Yeah.
Right.
Can we really do anything but act, do we have to act on this as it is presented to us, which is to say yes or no?
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
And then all of those other things that we're talking about, there's another observation I would make about part 1A, which is different than 2 and 3, or A, B, and C, is that 1 is, that's, what we're doing here. We're changing the governance of the town. The other 2 articles are using the authority of town meeting to try to affect state policy. I mean, they're two different animals. One is going to affect what we ask you and John to do, and the other is going to affect what we ask Stan Rosenberg to do. So.
All right, so now that I'm reading this again, I remember that, so 1A is the whole thing about putting all our money in local banks.
All eggs in one
1B
basket.
says to the degree that we're not allowed to do that, to ask that legislation be changed so that we be allowed to do that. And so we're basically saying, you know what, forget the legislation route, we just want it to be a financial policy of the town. And so we would basically be rejecting both 1A and 1B. Then part 2 is the thing about forming a Bank of Massachusetts for, along the lines of the Bank of North Dakota thing that Mr. Pooler was talking about. And we can take any position on that we might want to, but 1A and 1B are directly related.
Right,
And I think
1
what
and
we're
2 are different, yeah.
Right, so I think we're saying that our motion, once we get there, is going to be to not recommend 1A and 1B. And our discussion, and we could have a vote or just have it be by consensus, is that should there be a motion to refer it back to the Finance Committee to create a more comprehensive financial policy about this, that we also support that. Is that correct? Everyone's nodding. Okay.
Second.
So do we want to do anything with part 2, which is create this Bank of Massachusetts, or so this just becomes a resolution to ask the state legislature to do something?
It just seems to me, and it's unfortunate the petitioner is not here, but the town is actively working to create an investment policy. There's an expectation that would come before the Finance Committee for review and possible adoption as part of the townwide financial policies over the next few months even. why would we then, while we're in the midst of developing an investment policy through a process, at the same time endorse potentially a resolution to the legislature to change a state law that relates to our investment practices? To me, my recommendation to the select board would be to vote to not recommend the article, but support a motion to refer the entire article or portions of it to FinCom.
And so if something like part 2 did or did not come out of the future policy discussion by the finance committee, then it might proceed in that form or some different form as a resolution to the legislature. But at this point, that would be, it would be too early to do that because we haven't formed the policy yet. So I think that makes good sense. Ms. Brewer, you have your hand up.
So I guess I'm understanding that then. So then I understand my position that I'm not recommending 1A or 1B, but then for 2, rather than just saying, we have no opinion on this, it would be better to say no, because it would complicate our lives if we asked for it at this point. If it actually happened, if we asked for it and it actually happened, it would complicate our lives associated with developing our own financial policy.
And it's premature because we're not sure that we would want that. We've got to create the policy before we know what sort of outcomes we would want at the local or the
Just
state level.
not ready yet. Okay.
Does that make sense to folks? It seemed like a
Yeah, I
reasonable way
was,
to
I
go
was,
with
I was under the misapprehension that the two might be disconnected. We could take no position on the second because it has
Right.
no effect, but requiring to take all of our loans from there, and we're getting such great rates from wherever we're getting them from, that, I understand that completely.
it. Okay, all right.
So now I understand it differently. So
Yeah, and then differently, right.
Okay, so to summarize, we're going to not recommend Article 30 and support referral back to the Finance Committee.
If it's moved. yeah.
Okay, so, can you turn that into a motion?
I think so. I move that the select board not recommend to the April 1st, 2012 annual town meeting Article 30 petition article by law regarding measures relative to the banking of town funds and to refer development of a financial policy to the Finance Committee.
To support referral.
To support referral.
Second, if offered, right.
So it's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you
It's unanimous.
for waiting
Okay.
and helping us out.
Yes, Ms. McGinnis, thank you very much for your helpful memo and for coming in. Mr. Pooler, you can't leave yet because we're still doing capital.
Yeah.
I'm
No
here
luck.
for the-
Okay, would anybody like to speak to Article 30 and our position thereon?
No. No.
I'll do that. Okay.
The reason I'm not speaking up to do it is I realize that for JCPC, I'm doing more than I had realized I'm doing, and I have to find out a little bit more about what that involves before I commit to any more.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, now capital. So we have the JCPC report was in our first town meeting mailing.
Yep.
And we have 2 members of JCPC here with us, and rather than going like line by line through all of this, maybe we'll just sort of hit the highlights of whatever.
All right, there are Articles 15, 16, 17, and 18 are all related to JCPC and capital. Article 15 specifies the amount in the JCPC report to be expended from Chapter 90 highway funds, which is $500,000. Article 16 is our capital expenditure from general fund capital funds, which is $1,213,408. And again, within the JCPC report, there are several sources of funds, but it could be borrowing, it could be grants and so forth. But the $1,213,804 is what is related to directly to taxation. And then similarly for buildings and facilities, it's a total of $368,396, which again is the taxation portion of those items. The JCPC met several times over. And then we have debt authorization. There are 4 major capital items under debt. The tree planting program at $612,000, a major sander truck for DPW at $150,000, the new radio equipment for the police department at $125,000, and repairs to the Central Station Fire Headquarters at $184,000. I would just say a word about the JCPC process. We started the process this year with over $1 million more in requests for FY13 than we had available resources. We are spending 6.5% of the tax levy on capital, which is the same amount we spent in FY12. Eventually, town policy says we should be up to 10% of the levy, and I hope in the next year or two we can start to move in that direction. We'll make recommendations about that in the fall. And the JCPC report was recommended by a vote of 6-0. There was a minority report from Carol Gray, who had been on the JCPC up until about a couple of weeks ago, and she submitted a minority report. But otherwise, the committee supported all these recommendations, and I thought it was a very productive process. I'd be happy to go into any further detail on them. Give me an hour, and we'll go on by a line item.
So I think the most important thing to know about JCPC for folks working at home, Joint Capital Planning Committee is made up of representatives from Select Board, Finance Committee, Library, and School Committee, Library Trustees and School Committee, and it is one of our very true and robust processes for coming up with community-wide priorities across the different budget areas. And like all parts of the budget, it has vast amounts of priorities and needs that can't be funded this year because we simply don't have the money. Ms. Stein and Mr. Wald are our representatives to Joint Capital Planning Committee, and would either of you like to speak to anything special that you're particularly happy is finally getting funded, or anything that you wish could be funded this year, or anything else we should know about the process or the recommendation? Ms. Stein.
Well, let's see. I think perhaps getting the funding for the doors at Wildwood and Fort River School.
I was gonna ask you about that.
Fuss about that last year. Getting some repairs to the Hitchcock Center, which is desperately needed. Getting the generator for Town Hall so that we will have an emergency command center that can run computers, etc. In the event we ever have a similar event like the Halloween storm last year. I think those are the ones that, getting the bond for the tree, to try to restore our community's trees, I think is a really important one. The fire equipment, the radios, that's mandated by the federal government. We have no choice. Those are the ones that jump to my mind. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in general, I'd rather talk about the process as a whole, because as the chair said, it's really a very important committee which has wide representation. That's something to think about too when we decide who sits on the boards and committees that send people there, library trustees and finance and so forth, because and select board, we wear multiple hats. But I guess the thing I liked most this year is, I think, the increasing degree of cooperation, because sometimes an individual budget unit, whatever you want to call it, entity will make a proposal not aware that something is already in the budget or there's a better way to do it. So for example, there are several cases where there's communication between one unit and someone in another unit, and we're able to save money that way. Or for example, what looks like a priority in a certain case can be deferred, and so if the fire chief says, yes, it's safe, we can wait another year, that inspires confidence in the whole process. You know, it's not just a question of shuffling money around, but really the larger issues are being taken into account at every step.
Another case where the town, two different aspects of it worked well together, was the library wanted cameras for security. They put in a $60,000 request, if I remember right. Chris Kunis could provide the same level of security at only $20,000. So that was a win-win situation in terms of saving a big chunk of change and also providing the security need that was definitely important.
If that was either good communication or bad, depending how you look at it, but the outcome was good. Same with fire, you know, there were specific proposals for certain things, and the fire chief could say, this is okay, this isn't okay, and so forth. And you find out, the communication is interesting because it's actually a much more robust system. The fact that this library was tied in means that they got actually more service too, plus save money. So, good process all around.
Thank you. Mr. Hayden?
I had a question for my two colleagues, sort of a general question. As I look through this list without the spreadsheet that we'll be seeing later in front of me, I'm just recalling that most of these items, clearly not the narrowband radios, because that was a mandate that happened just at the beginning of the year, but all of the other stuff, or no, a lot of the other stuff, I recognize from years out. I mean, there are not a lot of surprises. It's sort of that line is moving forward. We're beginning to pick up the dump truck, for instance, and the snow plowing equipment, which I do remember, and the cruisers and all of that stuff, which this is there are a few surprises here. This is really the plan, and we're sticking with it. Yes?
I think that's true. I think the thing that really hit me this year was the terrible shape the central fire station was in. Maybe it was there last year, but the whole idea that there's leaking through the building, that the floor, which is the ceiling of the basement, could fall in from the weight of the fire trucks. I mean, this compelling need just hit me between the eyes this year. And it's what, $125,000 that I was not as aware of last year, if I was aware of it at all. So things do come into, you know, move to a very high priority that you may not have recognized the year before was because of such a great need.
So it's a good process to get the stuff in the pipeline, but still remain flexible as
Well,
things
exactly.
change.
Right.
Ms. Brewer?
And that item about the floor caving in is going to segue beautifully into my
Newer modern version. It will enhance the connectivity in our public spaces and cafes, et cetera, in our downtown to make it that much more attractive. And I'm told that the reception will be better than it ever has when that investment is made. And then I can't let an opportunity pass when talking about capital, not to mention the article, part of Article 18 on debt authorization, $612,000 for a tree replacement program. We expect to plant a minimum of 2,000 trees over the next 3 years. We looked at national models for such a program. Ann Arbor, Michigan, and others have undertaken very ambitious tree planting and stewardship programs. We brought in Alan Snow, certified arborist, to head our Parks and Grounds division of the DPW. He will be running the show on the specifics of this, and we're tremendously excited. It's not just about the money for the trees. There's a whole comprehensive program to plant the proper species in the proper locations and have a care plan to try to maximize the number of trees that survive. And there's partnerships with the Stockbridge School at UMass, et cetera. And we think that will strengthen our ability to leverage grants and other private fundraising to build upon this program. 5-10 years from now, people are going to really notice the difference when they drive around Amherst. how much more beautiful the town is, and that we've taken all these strides on reducing pollution, et cetera. So I'm thrilled with that. Can't wait to get started.
Thank you. And so those are two that you noted that that I'm very excited about also. Those are capital items to really be proud of. I mean, we're not just maintaining and investing in the things that we need to keep going. But the tree investment really speaks to our values as a community, and the Wi-Fi, that's something that I'm just very proud to have Amherst offer. You know, you go to most communities and that's not kind of a regular service of the downtown. That's something that serves folks who might not have internet access at home. It helps support our community as an educational community where education is our industry, and it makes it something that's really kind of mobile and everywhere. So I just think those are tremendous, and I thank the JCPC for recommending them. And thanks to Ms. Stein and Mr. Wald for all of their excellent participation in this throughout this process, and keeping us informed every week about kind of where things were. I served on JCPC a few years ago, and it really is it's a very, very impressive process, and it takes a lot of homework and a lot of good input and feedback from everyone who's participating. And so thank you both very much. Mr. Wald.
Just add a footnote at the risk of
Indeed.
extending the meeting. To the second one, Mr. Muzzanti said about the trees also. Another thing is that Mr. Snow was able to save us a lot of money. You can put in the trees for less money with maintenance than DCR could without maintenance. So great savings there. And again, you know, Amherst is made up of lots of very dedicated, inquisitive, creative people. So we always have 5 solutions and 10 questions for every issue that comes before us. And a lot of the conversations there as elsewhere are, what about this? I'm just curious, couldn't we do it this way or that way? And so you have to know what you're talking about. And so one of the things I was most impressed with was the professionalism of the town staff and the expertise, I guess we'd call it, of the town citizen volunteers. You know, Mr. Puller, Mr. Muzzanti, Ms. Moran from the Finance Committee, Chief Nelson, Chief Livingston. So if you say, our favorite question, why can't we get a hybrid for this? You know, they will tell you why you can't. The electrical system, the carrying capacity, the driving range, because they do this in Colorado and it's down in New York. And, you know, all of these people, same with the fire equipment, whether it's equipment for the firefighters or protection for the buildings, you know, they have the information at their fingertips and they can give you a precise and authoritative answer, and that makes it an educational as well as efficient process.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. Ms. Brewer.
I won't even apologize for extending the meeting because I still have questions. Again, thanks to serving on JCPC, to those of you who are doing that, because it is complicated. I appreciate that everyone works together on that. When I served on JCPC, when I was on the school committee, we went through a transition with the town manager, who was then becoming our finance director, where we made things much more straightforward in terms of objective, looking at what the various priorities are, which is so well explained here in the JCPC text. So this process just keeps getting better and better. In terms of questions that I have probably either already arisen at your meetings, or that are coming up around town so that we're prepared for them. In terms of the 3-year tree replacement program, after 3 years, is there a particular figure in mind for what might be considered maintenance? Just like we try and build in a little bit, you know, for the schools, it was asbestos abatement, $10,000 a year. We knew we'd find some, you know, from trucks. We try and look at a certain period of time. Do we have any idea what that's looking like?
I think the answer to that is not yet,
Okay.
but there will be.
But the plan.
We're going to learn, you know, I think it's a well thought out plan, but we're going to learn a lot in the course of implementing this ambitious program. And that one of the things we'll learn is what's a responsible minimum commitment level years 4 plus.
Right.
And I think one of the things we're thinking about is trees within the public way could be on town land or could be on private property, and getting people to have a sort of adopt a tree program, and to the extent you can take care of those trees in the first couple of years and make sure they're watered properly and so forth, so they really have a chance to grow in those first 2 years or 3 years. I think we're going to learn a lot about how successful that's going to be in terms of sustaining them. But trying to work very cooperatively with homeowners on that is going to be a big part of this program.
That's great. For the people who say, wow, $612,000 toward trees, we could be spending that money on people. What's the, beyond the fact that everything's in a larger context, how do we explain that at the most basic level? I mean, beyond my personal understanding of capital planning and the fact that we have so many unmet capital needs.
This is my short answer, hopefully it's short, is this is an investment that will pay dividends over the next 50 to 75 years. And this is an attempt to be bold and do something meaningful to reverse really what is a 30-year decline in the number and health of our public street trees. So I think we're also able to accommodate that within our capital budget planning, in part because of one of the many strengths cited in our bond rating report was the relatively low debt burden and the fact that whatever debt we do have is scheduled to be paid off rapidly. That puts us in a position to be able to entertain proposals for issuing new debt without overly burdening the budget. I think this fits into that category.
And it's borrowing, borrow to
Right.
pay operating expenses.
Is not a good plan.
Right.
Can I add one thing to that?
Boost one.
Yeah, the other thing, I looked at my figures here to remind myself, and I was correct. So Mr. Snow's plan is saving us $30 a tree times 2,000 trees. So do the math for that to begin with. Again, with maintenance for the beginning and not the rest. And the way he put it also is that he distinguished between so-called gray infrastructure like asphalt and cement and green, and said this is the only kind that gives back, and it gives back at a rate of about 3 to 1. And if you want the figures, 100 trees take out 53 tons of carbon dioxide, 430 pounds of other pollutants. They improve the quality of life. They make people want to spend more time walking downtown and maybe shopping and spending money downtown. They reduce, even been claimed to reduce crime, make neighborhoods safer. So I think there's a large tangible as well as intangible payback in terms of quality of life that we have to think about.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
And then, non-tree related, we of course only saw tonight, and only if we pulled it out of our packets, Ms. Gray, former JCPC members, minority report, which is largely a complaint about doing studies. And I just wanted to check with the town manager in terms of historically, beyond the fact that we're looking at gathering some information up on this, which is great, has JCPC typically, all the years I was on JCPC, we were doing studies. And I know that, people say, oh, that's not a building or a facility. This is not a new question. We've been looking at doing studies because we expect it to pay off over the long run through this capital plan. That's traditionally true. We've been doing this for a long time. This is not some new clever way of doing things, right?
That's right. And JCPC has recommended study money for the gateway zoning, which may lead to future public investment in that district, as well as private investment. And that's the basis upon which occasionally studies are recommended through the capital process. In town meeting, like it does for all spending requests that come before it, should vote to support or not support based on their collective judgment of the merits of the spending proposal in front of them.
Anything else on capital articles? Stein, would you like to make a motion?
Sure, you can do it really fast. I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 15, capital program, Chapter 90, in the amount of $500,000.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, unanimous.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 16, capital program, equipment in the amount of $1,213,804.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 17, capital program, buildings and facilities in the amount of $368,396.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, unanimous.
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 18, capital program debt authorization in the amount of $1,071,000.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. So we're actually gonna pause here because we need to talk about Article 19 and Article 20. So if
Yeah.
Mr. Poole would give us the brief explanation on those.
Article 19 is a debt rescission. It's 2 times in the past, town meeting authorized borrowing for purchasing of modular classrooms for the Marks Meadows School in 2007 and 2008. The total of those authorizations was $300,000. When the town finally borrowed money to purchase those, it issued bond anticipation notes of $220,000, and which meant there was $80,000 of unused capacity, which we are never going to use because we bought the modulars and that's it. So we would like to take that $80,000 of excess bond authorization off of our books. The term for that is to rescind that, and so that's what we're asking you to do.
So to be clear, that's not $80,000 that's out there that is then gonna be repurposed anyplace else. That was authorization to borrow, but we did not borrow it. So it's capacity for borrowing. It's not real dollars.
This is like cutting up a credit card that you never used.
Perfect example, thank you. I just think that's really important for people to understand because surely there's gonna be comments about that. Ms. Brewer?
Exactly, and along those lines, although it doesn't fit as nicely into the snipping of the credit card, is that we can't repurpose that allowance, so to speak, in order to reinstall them somewhere else, because that's not what the authorization was for. The authorization was to borrow, get them and install them the first time. So that's why we don't just like hang on to it and use it for something else. It needs to just, we're done with that project, that.
Exactly.
All right, other questions about Article 19? Ms. Stein?
I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 19, capital program debt rescission in the amount of $80,000.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye, that's unanimous. And Article 20.
Well, this one's a little arcane, but of the $220,000 that we borrowed and spent all the money and so forth, there was $6,261.96 left over. It's just sitting there. And bond counsel and our financial advisors have recommended that we repurpose those funds for another purpose that is allowable under the general laws for borrowing, so another purpose for which you could borrow. Chapter 44, Section 20 says that you can repurpose one borrowing for another when you have excess funds. And the reason that we want to do this now is that we want to, again, get it off our books so that we don't run into the 3-year timeline in which you have to spend money. In other words, you have to spend bond or band proceeds, in this case, within 3 years of your initial borrowing. And that 3-year period will be up this coming June 2012. So you have to find a project that is bondable and that you've already spent the money on. And that project, in this case, is the replacement of the sidewalks at the Banks Community Center, which is a project that happened last summer. All the expenditures have gone through there. So this is essentially an accounting move to say that of the total expenditures for that project, $6,261.96 will come from prior band proceeds, which will then free up that same amount of money, which will then become free cash.
Questions?
Yes.
Ms. Stein?
Okay, I have 2 questions, actually. Did you say bond or band?
I said band.
Okay.
Band is a bond anticipation note.
Okay.
And when you, let's say you were to issue a 10-year, authorize a 10-year bond, you can do bands, which are 1-year notes for up to 3 years, but you have to either spend that money, or you have to spend all that money within the 3 years. So that's,
Okay, so band was what I was hearing. And the second thing was, what was the total cost of the Bangs sidewalks? Does this cover?
Much more.
What portion is paid for? All of it, half of it?
oh, this 6,200 is covering, I'm gonna guess 10% of it, it's a
Oh.
fraction.
Okay, it's a fraction. Okay.
Ms. Brewer. So, again, to clarify, I circled the words excess borrowing capacity in Article 19, and Article 20 was, we actually got the dollars and they remain unspent. And that's why we need to repurpose it, because otherwise we just lose it. And we're allowed to use it for very specific purposes.
Right, and not to complicate it more, but it really ultimately all comes into play with our compliance with our arbitrage rules.
Ooh, another word I don't know.
The federal government has rules for how long you can sit on money that you borrowed on a tax exempt basis. And what they don't want you to do is borrow money on a tax exempt basis and then invest it in one of these bank accounts that we talked about before, whether foreign or domestic,
Right.
and earn higher interest. That's called arbitrage, and that's a sort of form of tax fraud.
And we try to avoid
And we
tax
very
fraud.
much
We don't do tax fraud in Amherst.
I think I'd like to vote for this.
Okay.
I need to make a motion.
Yeah, I think, are we done with questions or comments on Arcane Article 20?
Okay, I move that the select board recommend to the April 30th, 2012 annual town meeting, Article 20 capital program debt repurpose in the amount of $6,261.96 because we don't want to have.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Stay out of jail.
Unanimous. Okay, so now we gotta just go back in time a minute here. So Articles 15 through 19 are the regular JCPC articles.
Right,
And
Jim
15 through 18.
15 through 18.
Two, and I.
I'm sorry, 18, that's what I meant, yeah.
15 through 18, and I definitely want buildings and facilities because I'm doing it for JCPC. And what would you like for your number one, and then,
What can I list again?
and I guess we have to choose from 19 to 20 too.
So
Yeah,
we'll
whatever.
talk about that in a second, so.
Whatever, I mean, basically, we're essentially affirming what the other reports say anyway, so there's not a lot to explain.
Mostly, I think that's true.
So
Right,
Jim
for
just volunteered to
15
do them all.
For 15 through 18, that it should definitely be our JCPC reps.
Okay, so,
saying it, whatever,
yeah, so that's why I'm saying, I'll take 17 and whatever else. I'm happy with 90.
I can do 19 and 20 for that matter, so
I
just
can
take
do-
that off the list.
All right,
Yeah, I
so
can do
I'll
the
do
rest of the
15 and
JCPC.
17. How's that? Is that all right?
Second, we do.
So you'll do 15 and
Okay.
17, and then
And
Mr.
Jim-
Wald will do 16 and 18.
Okay.
Okay.
And Ms. Brewer will do 19 and 20.
Yeah.
Okay, so 19 and 20, just so that we're clear, these are actually select board articles, they're
Articles.
not finance committee articles, so
Right.
you get to make
I get to
kind of a
say
presentation.
something.
Of course, deferring to
And then I'll
Mr.
get-
Fuller for a while.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'll be able to.
I got 5 seconds and you get the rest of the time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge publicly again Sandy Pooler's outstanding work on all things budget, operating and capital, and all the other way too many special projects that I throw his way. So we're very fortunate to have him. He's doing great work for the town.
Really is, and this has long been an area, not long, no, I should say, it has long been an area of great strength in Amherst, and particularly coming from Mr. Musanti, who we held in such high regard, we made him our town manager, that it's been just a seamless transition, so it's really you've been a tremendous part of the team, so
Thank you all very much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for spending all of these hours with us this evening. And we'll see you again on Monday.
Yes. Look forward
So
to it.
if you're sick of us yet, pop on.
We can fix
See you
that.
again. Thank you for all of your information tonight, and thank you for coming back on Monday. And are we done with this for tonight? Yes, we are, because we did everything. Great. Okay. We're well behind schedule, but this is to be predicted or expected during town meeting season.
Yes.
Okay, so we're exactly 1 hour behind, which brings us now to the town manager's
Yes.
report. Mr. Musanti, and this is all largely carried over from last week when we were
Sure.
even further behind.
Very quickly, goods and services procurement training for town staff. I wanted to commend excellent work of our comptroller, Sonia Aldrich, and assistant comptroller, Holly Bowser. They led a training workshop. We had about 30 departmental staff in attendance, really working in coordination with the State Inspector General's guidelines about public procurement laws and procedures, best practices. Had a whole set of examples with Amherst-specific forms and procedures, and it was well received. And I wanted to acknowledge their good work. Secondly, we have recently implemented, and this is all inside baseball, but we're trying to be a greener community. We've gone paperless. I know you're excited about this. Paperless with our personnel requisition process. I would get writer's cramp on some of these personnel requisitions. That's gone electronic. Team effort with IT and human resources and our departmental staff. We're able to process payroll changes electronically now without piles of paper. And that's what I think is a sneak preview. It's a major focus of ours going forward. We are actively looking at things like electronic billing, which there's a lot of complications to that, including Massachusetts state law, what we can and cannot do, but we're actively looking at that, trying to build on our platform that we have with our online billing. We had some recent enhancements that are now live on our online bill pay. You can get all of your unpaid bills all in one place at one time, as opposed to going program area by program area on the town website. You can have it bundled together into one place, makes it easier for you to see and hopefully take action. So we're excited about that. Next, I wanted to mention spring is here. Mention some planning that's going on. We've had a really excellent meeting recently, early April on campus with a number of university officials from UMass Police, Dean of Students, External Relations, all the campus and community coalition partners. We had a number of town officials there. Stephanie joined us. We had public safety represented. We also had representation at this meeting from a number of our more prominent, larger area landlords, property renters, talking about planning for how to keep the community safe during the spring season. A lot of messaging going on from the university to students and parents of students about expectations for safe celebrations, etc. in the springtime. It was a good meeting of information sharing about our plans and the renewal, I think, of good dialogue with landlord community about how they can partner with us for the Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Initiative. In terms of public safety specifically, we had a very busy weekend this past weekend, Patriots Day weekend. On the police side, we had a high number of calls for service, 330. We ended up with about 71 arrests, which was a high number. Areas of greatest concern were in the North Amherst area, Townhouse, Meadow Street, Lower Main Street. We did have some arrests in those locations and some citations for noise bylaw and nuisance house bylaw violations. We also have a state alcohol abuse prevention grant for enforcement. Police were assigned on this grant in the Fearing Street, Phillips Street area, enforcing open container related issues. We've also had officers spending time in advance of some of the weekends, going door to door, particularly in some of the rental properties, distributing information about expectations for the spring, and so that's going on. Our next 2 weekends have been gearing up to be likely to be our busiest. We'll have most of our police department on duty the next 2 weekends in advance of finals and commencement exercises at the various colleges. We'll also be receiving some support from the state police alcohol enforcement team coming into town. We had incredibly beautiful weather on Monday. It was a gorgeous day, and we had a large number of people, primarily young people, take that opportunity to gather at Puffer's Pond, which in and of itself it's a wonderful resource. We did have problems, however. A number of them did have alcohol and left behind, quite frankly, a giant mess. And through the efforts of a number of neighborhood volunteers, some initial cleanup, and town crew spending all day Tuesday cleaning up the mess up at Puffer's Pond. I share the outrage and frustration that many members of the community feel about what happened, and we will do our best going forward to try to manage those prospective situations as best we can. The fact that it was this early in the spring was a bit of a surprise, and it's just a basic set of expectations. You know, we can have all these fancy regulations and all kinds of enforcement, but you know what? We have a pretty basic law in this community and most communities about no open containers. That needs to be observed, and when people go into a town park or a national park or the beach, you should be expected to haul out what you haul in and not leave behind a mess. So it's trying to communicate those expectation levels. And the vast majority of the time those are observed, but we have these cases such as Monday when they're not. And it's an ongoing effort to try to prevent those going forward. Recent and upcoming activity, joined many of you at the Survival Center groundbreaking ceremony last Friday on Sunderland Road in North Amherst. Wonderful event. People from all parts of the community were there. It was really a day that we were reminded of the needs that are being met through the services of the Survival Center, and looking forward to having that new building open up right around the first of the year, next January.
Everything? Questions, comments?
If we could talk a little more about Puffer's Pond, obviously it was a hot topic. There, to clarify, and there might even be a sign there, although I haven't been in a while. So, just like other parks in town, no alcohol is in fact allowed at Puffer's Pond to begin with.
That's right.
So.
And that's nothing new.
That's nothing new. Secondly, this whole idea of hauling in and hauling out, while some people are more familiar with it than others, clearly this party was just beyond that concept. So have we considered, given that we do want to encourage people to take their trash with them, have we considered installing some more trash and recycle container receptacles? We know that that would not have caused people to not have left this mess. But in terms of, in general, we tend to be a little stingy with our trash barrels, both on the common and in our parks. So could we, you know, have somebody think about whether or not it's worth installing a couple extras?
We are exploring that as one of the many postmortems of this particular event.
Okay. Because we have, like I said, on the common, et cetera, we often seem to have a little bit of a shortage of trash cans. And the other comment was associated with open container. Is it correct to assume that if the police had not been so busy trying to keep people safe while they were at Puffer's Pond and off of the private property that surrounds Puffer's Pond, that in fact they could have made far more open container arrests because there was just a plethora of people with open containers, but it's not like it was really reasonable to expect to arrest all of them.
That's exactly right.
I'll just emphasize that with the things that we talk about here at select board meetings just barely scratch the surface of the stuff that is being dealt with on all of these issues. This is the third meeting that I've talked about Puffer's Pond in today.
This
Mr.
is
Musanti,
Wednesday.
right, Mr. Musanti has been in multiple meetings, had multiple conversations about this. There is so much effort being directed at the kind of off-campus issues that are the challenges of being a magnificent college town, that, you know, Mr. Musanti talked about the spring coordination meeting. We could talk about that for 2 hours, the stuff that came out of that, and the meetings that we haven't even talked about. You know, we had a meeting with the bar owners from the pre-St. Patrick's Day celebration that I think we haven't even mentioned yet. So much town resources is being devoted to this stuff. So I just want folks to know that, you know, whatever you hear here and you sort of think, oh, like they're paying that much attention to it, you don't have a clue how much attention is being paid to this stuff. It's an extreme effort of the town working together with the university to try and discourage and otherwise solve these problems. So it is a challenge. The partnership with the university is just getting better and better. The communication from that meeting Mr. Musanti talked about the spring coordination, great stuff came out of that meeting, and I love being at meetings that things really happen at. And so just as an example, Officer Pronovost, Captain Pronovost from the police department talked about specific bylaws that Mr. Musanti referenced, going door to door, bringing this information to different rental properties. So they've got both an 8.5 by 11 printout, and they've got these door hangers. At that meeting, the landlords, property managers, and folks from Dean of Students' office all wanted that information so that they could also put out that same information to on-campus students and to and so that the landlords and the Dean of Students and everyone could be reinforcing each other's messages. So really the communication and coordination on all these different things, that's just an example, is really intense, and I think it's really working. I mean, we can't see what we don't see. You know, we can't see what's not happening. We don't know what is being prevented or what is less bad because of our efforts. At the same time, the efforts have never been better coordinated and are extremely strong and being reinforced and very focused. And so I think everybody's feeling really good about it. At the same time, the challenges are ongoing. We're never going to solve these problems. The best we can do is work together and try and address them as best we can. But I just want the community to know how very much effort is being put into these issues and what a high priority they are for the town and for the university. Ms. Brewer?
I appreciate you saying that and having, I mean, you do report to the Campus City Coalition, town manager often reports, but I think it is really worthwhile to continue to remind us of some of those details and those examples, because that had not always been the case years ago. And so it really is a much improved relationship with the university, everybody really working together. And it's been really wonderful to see on so many fronts, so many people sharing the same ideas and not just paying lip service, but actually saying we can make a difference in how things work.
Right. It's really a bringing together of people who all are acknowledging that there's a problem. And it's not pointing fingers at folks, it's saying, okay, what do we all bring to bear on a solution here, and really working together to try and do that. And it's been very, very gratifying, even though it continues to be frustrating when new issues pop up. Puffer's Pond, you know, how do you predict something like that? We had the police department was fully staffed for the whole weekend and extremely busy. well, now this is Monday in the middle of the day, you know, and you just don't know. So it's a challenge, but I'm really proud of the work that the town and the university are doing together on this stuff. I'll shut up now. Okay, other questions or comments? It's getting later, Stephanie. Okay. Okay, so other member reports. So nothing else for Mr. Busante, questions or comments for him? Okay. Member reports, BCG, I think you've got the summary points in your packet. We essentially dealt with that when we talked about the recommendation on the unfunded list, the FY13 budget discussion back a couple hours ago. So BCG, the only thing we didn't touch on, which I started to reference in that discussion, but then we didn't talk about it, was the fact that we have since then learned that the House is recommending that $65 million that we've talked about multiple times in this meeting, that the MMA has been advocating for, that we put together a letter advocating for, that if the additional revenue was expected to be available at the state level to make the appropriations part of the cherry sheet, initial base appropriations to cities and towns, rather than making it an additional appropriation in the fall as they did last year. The House is recommending that happened, and so the implications of having more state aid than we were originally planning for it is now a higher likelihood reality than it had been previously. BCG has not dealt with this yet. BCG is probably going to meet in advance of town meeting to talk about a policy on this. Whatever, not a policy, a recommendation, whatever came out of that, I mean, not to get in front of BCG, but I expect that it will be quite like last year, that you don't spend that money, because it still is very unpredictable money. And if there were going to be any recommendations for spending it in any way, that would come in the fall. It wouldn't be for the spring. But just so folks know that state aid situation is a little bit improved since BCG and since our last select board meeting. Anything else on that?
No, that's.
I would just mention quickly, just to be a little bit of Debbie Downer on that, that is of course the House budget at this point. There is much more to come in terms of wrangling, and although we're very pleased with that, advocates for many other aspects of the budget are extremely upset with the budget. So it's certainly possible that some other needs will be given priority over that $65 million. So I think it's very brilliant of us to not race around trying to find ways to spend it, because it isn't over till it's over.
That's an excellent point to make. And just so folks know, that $65 million translates to about $500,000 for the town of Amherst. So that's the figure we're talking about. All right. So that's BCG. JCPC, anything beyond that?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to mention a couple of things that we didn't get to fund, which sort of kill me, because, you know, they would save the town money, only, for example, the insulating two of the libraries, and they've had studies done that show we could pay it back over a relatively small number of years. So it kills me not to be able to do that, especially as we're being a green community. The same with boiler parts, that would make heating more efficient. And then Ms. Moran, the chair, mentioned getting video cameras for the police cars, because, you know, you would like to be able to document that is in a responsible manner, and that the students don't sometimes, or other perpetrators. It isn't only students, I shouldn't pick on them. So I think sometimes we forget the pain of what we can't supply capital for. So that's all I want to say for JCPC too.
Well, since we're on the topic. I mean, that's an example, but there were cases also where plans were put forward and other people who knew more, such as the police or their fire chief, would say, this is not necessary, or it's not necessary now. So for example, the insulation was not, it's not that it's not a good idea, but the proposal was to fund the insulation by taking the money out of the money, take it out of the money that was set aside. It would have rated what was left over for the future, which was Mr. Rizanti and Mr. Pooler had a long discussion about how much money to set aside for the future. So there was no place to take that without taking from someplace else.
Right.
And we should also mention, if you turn to page 21 of your budget book, that the library tax support increased 6.68% over FY11 and is now funded 75% out of the town budget. So, you know,
I just mean that it's a green goal.
Sure, but it's not a priority. I'm just saying that we all have lots of needs we can't satisfy, and so every individual unit establishes priorities.
Right. It's kind of the theme of this whole
Yeah.
meeting, I think, is the things that, at least we can fund this much of operating and capital and human services, et cetera, and yet there is still so much other stuff that we can't be funding and needs to be still done. Okay, other liaison or representative reports?
Well, we never got to talk about them last time, so
Right.
this goes back a while, so I'll go through them fast. Well, we attended the Lamplighter Awards, where you spoke and where Mr. Musanti spoke, and I thought it was very well done this year. On the next day, there was, the Personnel Board met with staff, which is an annual event where staff gets to speak about their concerns, and that was interesting. They seemed happy with the 2% COLA and less happy, if I gathered what the initial speaker was saying about the time that was chosen for the meeting, which didn't seem major, but let's see. Then on that evening, I visited the shelter, and I would like to say a few words about that because it was really extraordinarily interesting. I think that it was well worth the visit. It appears very well run. There seems to be an overflow of people. The shelter seems to be able to manage to feed everybody, even the overflow. It was an especially happy night because one of the previously homeless persons had actually gotten housing and was going to be able to move out of needing the shelter. So to celebrate the event, they had pizza, they had a homemade cabbage slaw, they had brownies, they had fruit, they had, coffee, tea, other beverages. It seemed very warm. I was amazed that they serve all this food on china plates and dishes and glasses, and that volunteers from Amherst College were at the sink washing and drying and putting back things. It was really an amazing experience, and I'm very glad I went. Let's see. We attended Stan's Municipal Conference on Saturday, March 31st. And I thought what happened there is worth reporting. First, that Jake Kaufman, who's representative from Lexington, talked about their goal to improve transparency by putting all the money that they take in online and all the expenditures of online. So that's going to be a first. And also that they want to look at the tax credits that the state has given and to see if the credits given and what it costs the state to do so is balanced by enhanced revenue. Because they've never been able to, or never have tracked that before. And that seems like an extremely worthwhile thing to do. And then I think you didn't mention, but it was a very nice reception for the new code enforcer and building commissioner. That was delightful, and it was well attended and a nice occasion. So that's all I have to say.
I want to mention one item, but I also wanted to ask the town manager or any one of us who was also at the municipal conference what the term is for that. We call it tax loopholes, but what's the technical term for those things that we don't tax, that we
Credits,
set aside?
they use the word credits.
Exempt.
Yeah.
Exemptions.
It's called the tax expenditure budget.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah. Oh,
everything
yeah,
that
right.
is, everything that's a credit, a deferral, an exemption, is all part of the tax expenditure budget. And
Right.
what was really striking to me was that, and I don't really hold numbers in my head that well, so if this is wrong, I apologize, but I believe that we have $24 billion, is 24 billion, right?
In that
In
range.
tax expenditures and 22 billion in tax revenue that we collect. So we actually, our tax policies are to forego more in tax revenue than it is to collect. Now, most of that is low-income stuff like the earned income tax credit. Is that a federal one? We've got a state, something with a state.
Yeah, that and, exempting food and clothing from sales tax and things like that.
Right.
It's a large number.
But he was, sorry, one of the things he was saying was like the film industry got all kinds
Right.
of credits to come to the state. That makes it economical for them to make a film here, but do we get a payback on that? And that's what they're gonna be taking a very close look on.
Right. So that report is due April 30th. It's going to be on the state's website. It's going to be really fascinating. So the question is going to be how to look at everything fresh. There aren't going to be any recommendations attached to the report is what he was saying to us, because that was beyond their charge. But he's expecting that over the next couple of years, they'll be looking at them, seeing if the policy goals that were associated with each of those tax credits, whether it be, that nonprofits don't pay property taxes, is one example. Whether the policy goals are still being met to the extent that is justified by the money that's being foregone there, or if that money could be better spent. So Ms. Stein's example of tax credits to the film industry or life sciences industry, et cetera, they're gonna really go through the ones that are potentially discretionary, over the next couple of years and see if there's some ground that can be made up. And it was fascinating, and I look forward to that report on the 30th.
Yes, thank you for elaborating on that and for bringing it up this time, because that was really amazing, and I just didn't bring my notes in with me, and so I forgot the name of it. And it also seems like they're really trying hard to quantify reality as opposed to it being anecdotally based. So whenever people make comments about the airline industry and the fact that you don't have to pay sales tax on the parts for repairing your airplane, people are like, if you can afford a private plane, you can afford to pay the tax on the parts. But then people say, oh, but then they'll go to Connecticut or New Hampshire instead and see what happened when we did that. And then it just it's just this constant circle, and it never really goes anywhere. So they're trying to really outline what it really means in terms of dollars, so that, again, we can look at it from a policy standpoint. So at least have the dollars first. The other item I just wanted to mention, in addition to all the wonderful things, is I got volunteered to speak to this when it was at a different time, but this is in our packet, so it's online as well. MassPIRG has a project where they are doing 100, what do you feel about that? And they can feel free to break some ground on that, and maybe somebody will have done that. But otherwise, I would plan that we'd work on it over the summer and look at it for the fall, so that we would be prepared to deal with it well before the next year of various committee meetings. But it's just not happening right now.
So we had created a self-created deadline or goal, not a deadline, but a goal of getting this done by the end of the fiscal year. Life happens, and that just not proved to be practical, so I think it's a very good idea to put this off until the fall. We can give it more attention over the summer. And Ms. Brewer's point about Amherst being a guinea pig is an excellent one. We don't need to trailblaze on this, and it isn't the most critical issue facing us at the moment. So folks can expect more information about that over the summer and in the fall. All right, chair's report, Ms. Burson.
The only other thing I was going to mention, although it doesn't exactly fall under this, is you might have noticed we haven't been doing a lot of appointments. Well, it's getting to be that season again, and Ms. Stein and I are gearing up for that as we're working on all these town meeting things, because it's nice how it all fits together that way. Or not, so I say. But at our next meeting next Monday, we do expect to be able to, we finally believe we have amassed enough CAF forms to appoint the Housing and Sheltering Committee. So we're really looking forward to them being able to get us started. So we're hoping to bring that before you on Monday.
Great. All right, anything else under member reports? Chair's report. I go to lots and lots of meetings on our behalf, and if you want to know more about them, talk to me later. I spoke at the warrant review, just doing the select board's part of warrant review. We've got a meeting later this week with Ellen Story. She does these periodic meetings, bringing folks together on economic development issues, really just kind of sharing information, bringing folks together so they can share information from the town and the different colleges and university sides about what's going on, so that's later this week. Tomorrow is the motion review meeting for town meeting. That's a couple hours with the moderator and town council and everybody. This is all the prep work that goes into the logistics of town meeting. One thing I had reported on a couple of select board meetings ago was part of this whole campus and community coalition thing was that I was going to be writing a letter to the Daily Collegian, and as select board knows, that I did that, and they did publish that. That was a couple weeks ago, but just in case anybody's paying attention at home, that did happen. And something that I mentioned a while ago is that I'm invited to speak at the Applewood Luncheon on Saturday, April 28th, so that's coming up in a week and a half. So I'll be doing that also. I think that's all I have to report on your report. That's work.
I assume it would come up when we came to the individual articles, but did anything exciting come out of the warrant review that we hadn't previously heard? I mean, I know that usually a lot of questions don't get asked, but.
Right, it's such a limited amount of time.
It moves along pretty quickly.
It does. So did anything really significant come out of there? Not that I remember. I do encourage folks to watch it because, again, this is something we get so close to that we sort of forget how everybody else views it. But it is on rebroadcast on ACTV and available on the website. It is a great overview of every one of the articles, so it is very helpful, especially for town meeting members to prepare. And the other thing I was going to say about that was, I can't remember.
Okay.
Oh, somebody mentioned to me that it seemed early this year, and so it'll be interesting. I've kind of made some notes for next year as just another part of all of these things that we juggle when we're trying to determine the times for things, and obviously TMCC determines the time for the warrant review, but there are all these factors that all influence each other that, I tend to put together the calendar with recommended dates for when we set town meeting, when we set the town election and stuff like that. You sort of forget about all the other things that go along with that, even though we have our rule of thumb for trying to have the warrant signed 4 weeks before, blah, 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 so that TMCC can fit in all their events. But I was even thinking about the mailings this time and thinking when they would go out in relation to when we signed the warrant, the town meeting warrant, completely forgetting that, in fact, you can't send it out too early because that's before the town election, when we don't even know who the town meeting members are, especially this year, when every single town meeting member was up. So it's really a complicated process to make all this stuff work together, but the timing of the warrant review, I've just got sort of a note to look at that next year in case TMCC needs any feedback. And along the way, I'll just remind folks that we will, at our select board meeting after town meeting, have kind of our wrap up again of the process as we always do. So if you have any thoughts along the way, just make a note to yourself so that we can add those, because then we send that feedback out to whoever is appropriate to receive it. All right. Anything else? Did we do all of our untimed items?
I think we did.
We did, good. So.
Anybody else notice anything? But I checked it all off, I think.
We didn't have any appointments. We didn't have any tax deductions.
No, but we had liquor licenses and we did those.
Okay, we did minutes.
Yeah, I think we're good.
The only other thing I should have mentioned associated with member reports is last week I did do the RSDPC, the Andy Steinberg, Catherine Oppie, Alyssa Brewer thing, where we're looking at regionalization and the possibility of joining with the other towns into a regionalization planning board. We did do a public forum, the first of 2 that were required to focus on Amherst-specific issues. Last Wednesday night, it was not well attended, although the people that did come did participate. It looked like it went well over TV, and we'll be putting a link on the webpage for that. There are quite a few documents available on the webpage as well. And we are looking at having a guest speaker to do a meeting in May, which, yes, we have town meeting, but it'll be on a Thursday night more than likely in May to do the second forum, because we want to not get out of sync with the other towns as they continue to move forward in their discussions. So we have also been meeting with them informally to listen to guest speakers, and we'll probably have another one next week. So you can follow all that on the RSDPC website, and I'll let you know if anything exciting comes up. There will be a report by Catherine Oppie, who is chairing that, and also happening to chair the school committee now, under Article 1 at town meeting. That's already arranged.
Great, Okay, which brings us to upcoming things. Just looking at the calendar preview, we meet again in 5 days. As we know, we'll be back in town hall. Yes. That is our last pre-town meeting. We will be meeting on April 30th at the middle school. Next, on Monday night, we'll talk about our expectations for meetings during town meeting. On the calendar preview, it says for the 30th, oh no, that's right, yeah, the FY12 third quarter budget update. That had originally been scheduled for the 23rd, it's now gonna be the 30th. And I don't think I have anything else to add to the upcoming calendar preview. Nothing that's happening in the next 5 days that we can't talk about that. So, is there anything else we need to say before Mr. Hayden makes his most welcome motion?
I would then move to adjourn.
And without objection, this meeting
Second.
adjourns
Wonderful.
at 10:10. Thank you very much.
Nice round number.
I lost track.